Part 4. Palestine, Connections, Ruptures, and Popular Resistance. 10. Connections and Ruptures. Majid Shi'aid. TH's chapter is part of my current research project on settler colonialism in Palestine. It builds on previous articles. THERST, Shi'aid 2015a, focused on the local impact of Israeli settler colonialism. Rough Stories and Voices of Residents in Kafr Yasif, a Palestinian village in Galilee. It explored the impact of 1948, the creation of the Israeli settler colonial state, and the imposition of military rule soon after on the sense of place, confinement, isolation, and alienation that these Palestinians had felt since 1948, the rupturing of their connections to the rest of Palestinian society, and their connections to peoples and places in the neighboring Arab states and beyond. It is an article about those Palestinians who remained on their lands after 1948 and became citizens of a state that was built on the destruction of their own society, and how the restrictions on mobility within and without Palestine affected their sense of space and identity. It also explored different forms of connections they tried to create as a response to the new situation they found themselves in, their history of resistance to state policies led with aspirations, hope, desires, and complicity. The article explored their histories and voices that challenge both Arab nationalist historiography that, in reaction to Zionism, claimed rootedness and indigeneity, and at the same time, it challenged Zionist myths about the unrootedness of Palestinian Arabs, representing them as unrooted invaders/strangers to the land, and held them in contempt and saw them as a footage column. Their stories and voices challenge the sense of presence and absence that they nd themselves in both by Zionism and the Israeli state, but also by Arab nationalism that mirrored Zionism and Western modernity by focusing on the land/state and ignoring the human. 1. The second article, Shi'aid 2015b, focused on the regional/continental impact and questions the place of Israel in Asia, a state that considers itself European/Western, as portrayed by its political and leadership, and it is also viewed as such by Western leaders and public, a point often publicly stated by Zionist and Western leaders. By asking about the place of Israel in Asia, my approach in that article thus positions this cartographic question in the context of race, colonialism/settler colonialism, and modernity. The article also questioned the place of native Palestinians in Asia. It is, what political, economic, social and cultural consequences and connections are possible if one thinks of Palestinians as West Asians, or as Asians, rather than as Middle Easterners. As such, the article was also about rethinking Asia and the meaning of Asia, how the geographic and political construct of Asia was developed, and who is included in this designation. It explores the cross-regional and trans-border connections within Asia that have been marginalized in academic work but also in public memory and knowledge about the peoples of the region and their long history of interaction, the cultural laws within the continent, and economic and political connections among peoples, groups, and states within the continent of Asia. Thus Israel must be seen as a European project in Asia. It is at the heart of Europe, and it is not by accident that it receives massive support from Europe/West. One might also think of Canada, Australia, and other settler colonial cases as European/Western projects. Building on the two articles summarized above, the third article, Shi'aid, 2015c, linked the local, regional/continental with the global by looking at the place of Israel in the globe, or what I call here global Israel. Thinking about Israel in this way extends the question of the cartography of Palestine/West Asia and Israel in Asia to thinking about Israel in the world and to Israelization as a global process that has ramifications for those outside the region and continent. I also want to make a brief note about my research method here, for I do not dne my interviewees as those to be studied or objects of knowledge production, or as as Walter Mignolo, 2000, terms them, but as a source of knowledge and epistemology. It is from the conversations with these Palestinian villagers and workers that I was struck by the idea of a global Israel, and not just a local or an Asian/regional Israel. I realize that this concept was a morphing one that would engage with the impact of the Israeli settler colonial state on Palestine. I will gesture here to a few preliminary points that undergird the global nature of this settler colonial project. 1. The Israeli settler colonial state triggered the dispersal of millions of Palestinians to Asia, Africa, Europe, Australia, and the Americas, and thus made them part of a global diaspora and exilic subjects who by nature have a deep attachment to their homeland and the people from whom they were separated. 2. The Zionist project also claims to represent Jews around the globe and indeed has recruited Jewish communities from all around the globe to manage this project. Furthermore, Jewish communities around the world continue to engage with the Israeli project either by critiquing it, or more commonly by supporting it and agitating against those who critique Israel. Finally, due to the significance of religious sites and histories, Palestine/Israel elicits strong feelings, attachments, and interventions from people around the globe. Thus, it is very tempting to think of Israel/Palestine as a global question and of what I am calling global Israel. The major focus of that article is an argument for why the Israeli settler colonial project in Palestine is better theorized as a global question and not just one that impacts the native Palestinian and local space or a regional question. His argument does not negate the local and regional impact of Israel, nor does it deny that the most staggering consequences of the creation of Israel were felt most by the native Palestinian society, but rather it conceptualizes the local through its regional and global dimensions. On 231. The one hand, Israel, world Jewry, and their supporters, and on the other, Palestinians and their supporters engage in continuous battles over rights, ethics, and politics. And the article is complementary to Global Palestine, Collins 2011, where Collins argues the global solidarity with Palestine is a response to global concerns about justice, rights, ecology, repression, racism, and discrimination. The article framework. His chapter engages two presumably unrelated schools of thought, RST, Theories of Nomadology and Mobility by Deleuze and Guattari, 1986, and their earlier, more expansive incarnation as theorized by the 14th-century Arab scholar Ibn Khaldun, and second, Theories of Settler Colonialism, especially as articulated by Fayez Sayegh, 1965. The chapter also engages with the concept of Patrick Wolf about the nature of settler colonialism as a structure rather than an event, and also Ibn Khaldun's ideas on the nomad settler, whose presence in the new location and community can only be sustained by mixing with the local culture. And Nally, the chapter engages with the psychological impact of settler colonialism on the native indigenous community utilizing ideas from Ibn Khaldun and Frantz Fanon, 1968, 1969. By expanding the concept of rupture, I argue that settler colonialism in Palestine can be better understood in its global dimension and impact rather than as it is normally analyzed as a purely local or even regional issue. His chapter thus contributes to work on settler colonialism, nomadology, Palestine and Arab studies, studies of colonialism and global studies, and it aims at deprovincializing the question of Palestine and Palestine studies. It theorizes a new way of seeing Palestine by reframing the Palestine question as a local, regional, continental, and a global issue both in its origin and its current development, by examining how Israel has created local, regional, and global ruptures for Palestinians and others. In Theories of Settler Colonialism and Palestine Studies, Sayegh's work, 1965, is a pioneering one for it goes beyond the local implication of Israeli settler colonialism. Sayegh argues that the creation of the Israeli state led to the delinking of Palestine from Asia and Africa, as Palestine historically formed a link between these two continents. Furthermore, the settler colonial project undermines the sovereignty and self-determination not just of Palestinians but of all the peoples in these continents because it did not receive their consent. 3. According to Sayegh, the creation of the Israeli settler colonial state was an imposition on the region by Western colonial powers against the wishes of the peoples of Africa and Asia and created a rupture between Africa and Asia that countered and undermined the decolonizing wave in these continents. My study builds on this argument by looking at the implications of Israel as a rupture beyond Asia and Africa. To begin with, Palestine is not only connected to continents but also to the Mediterranean and was always a link that connected peoples from countries around it. Many from Greece and other places migrated to Palestine. Some of these migrants became leading figures in the Palestine national movement. To limit the impact of the rupture of Israeli settler colonialism to Africa and Asia limits our understanding of its implications globally. 232. Rough interviews with elders in the village of Kafr Yasuf, elders who lived before 1948 and experienced the rupture of 1948. The concept of rupture by siege is expanded. To the question of what did the creation of the Israeli state mean for them, several talked about social, economic, and cultural rupture. Many people in Galilee before 1948 intermarried, visited, imported, or exported goods to neighboring countries. Social, cultural, and economic connections were ruptured by the creation of the Israel state. Were unable to continue these connections after 1948. Legally Israel prohibited them from doing so. Also, neighboring Arab states also did not allow legal interaction with them since they had become Israeli citizens. The concept of rupture was more than about political rupture. Even internally, Palestinians have been ruptured in every aspect of their lives. For most if not all of them, their way of life was ruptured by the Israeli state. Rough confiscation of lands, for example, farming became less possible. Can be also framed as a social rupture, not just economic, because farming in the past created social gatherings that we hardly see today. Is also a legal rupture since Palestinians do not have the same rights as Jewish Israelis, who can, for example, marry anyone from any other place and get them Israeli citizenship. On the other hand, this is harder for Palestinians, especially if they marry another Palestinian from outside of the 1948 borders. Is legal apartheid, and all settler states are apartheid states, creates an emotional rupture. Palestinian citizens of Israel cannot love and marry who they want. One can give several examples about the previous internal ruptures, and also talk about other aspects and other forms of rupture. In short, the concept of rupture is much wider than the political, and it affects every aspect of the lives of the Palestinians. Furthermore, the Israeli settler colonial project has been a global one from its founding and was supported and continues to be aided and defended by global empires. It was a project that denied itself as a global one, the ingathering of Jews from all over the world, and continues to be claimed as a project that all Jews around the world must support. Furthermore, by the creation of Israel, millions of Palestinians today live all over the world and have an attachment to Palestine that remains restricted and shaped by Israeli policies of denial of the right to return, restriction on entry, and restriction on family unication. Also, Israel/Palestine is a question that occupies so much attention at the United Nations, in world politics and in so many states, often exhausting energies and resources. It is a question that generates much solidarity all around the world for those who see the injustice done to the native Palestinians, a solidarity that is also met with attacks and repression in many parts of the world by pro-Israeli forces. In Global Palestine, John Collins, 2011, argues that the Palestine question has created such a powerful global solidarity movement because of the many issues intertwined with it that affect people all around the world, such as access to water, access to land, the right to mobility, the right to education, the right to work, the right to self-determination, the right to freedom of speech and, indeed, the right to life, a life with dignity. In Global Israel, 5 I argue that Israel is the other side of the coin of Collins' analysis of global Palestine as a sign of global solidarity. Global Israel has infringed on all these rights locally, regionally, and globally, albeit with different intensity and outcomes. In my view, it is through the study of this global rupture created by the Israeli settler colonial state from 1948 to the present that one can better understand its global 233 impact. which includes wars, displacement, refugees, invasions, airstrikes, blockades, sanctions, repression, restrictions on movement and on entry, among other consequences. Rupture has become a permanent structure that has been impacting Palestinians and peoples from around the world, and it has also produced a global movement of solidarity. To theorize the rupture produced by global Israel, I utilize the work of the 14th century Arab scholar Ibn Khaldun, especially his concept of the nomad, as a lens to understand mobility as a central aspect of human life. My work brings the theories of Sayegh and Ibn Khaldun into conversation, as they both deal with rupture, but from different intellectual perspectives. Sayegh uses a THIRD-worldist prism and analysis of settler colonialism, while Ibn Khaldun was thinking about questions of the nature of the human and the ways in which mobility, connections, and cooperation, and labor and creativity are all central to being human in his analysis. I utilize Ibn Khaldun's work on nomadology/mobility as a corrective to its misappropriation by Deleuze and Guattari, who borrow the nomad concept from Ibn Khaldun, with a marginal reference in their work. They argue that Ibn Khaldun's concept of the nomad is pre-modern, and specific to a certain culture and group, and theirs is modern and universal. 6. Yet, their work restricts the meaning of the nomad to one aspect, central as it is, that focuses on the relationship between the individual and the state, specifically in the context of violence and war-making. 7. Accordingly, their analysis is connected to the modern European state, in line with the work of Charles Tilly, 1985, among others, that also views the individual through the prism of the modern state, a specifically Eurocentric approach. On the other end of the spectrum of the school of nomadology that developed from the work of Deleuze and Guattari, the nomad is presented as the human who is without roots, without connections, and continually roaming the earth unmoored from political structures or places of origin. 8th's romanticized version of the nomad has been criticized, and rightly so. Alex Young, 2015, building on the work of critical Native American scholarship such as that of Jody Bird, argues that this idealized notion of the nomad in the Deleuzean school serves to erase both the natives, who are excluded from such narratives, and their history and experience as a result of violent Western/European mobility/nomadology. Young sees this view of nomadology as based on a settler colonial fantasy. My theorizing of nomadology/mobility, as articulated originally by Ibn Khaldun and later misappropriated by Deleuze and Guattari, can contribute to the ongoing debate about settler colonialism in different fields, and to the discussion of border studies and migration, among other issues. Deleuze and Guattari's framing and exceptionalizing of the nomad, either as a violent conqueror or as world traveler, is in both senses a misconception of the original concept aired by Ibn Khaldun, which is more universal. Nomad is part of Ibn Khaldun's theory of social organizations that took place in the context of pre-modern nation-states. While mobile humans or nomads, in Ibn Khaldun's understanding, might challenge the rule or government of territory during and through their mobility and can engage in violent resistance to that rule, there are other aspects of mobility that are central to being human. In contrast to the restricted analysis of nomadology and mobility, which also emerges from a Western privilege of movement, rootedness, and 234. Mobility are dialectically related for Ibn Khaldun. Nomadism is neither about invading Mongols nor the romance of Orientalized Bedouin sheiks. Ibn Khaldun's Arabic term for the nomad, Bada'i/Badu, Bedouin/Bedouins, is primarily an economic category rather than an essentialized cultural trait. It references a mode of economic production or, as he described it, the way one person or group makes a living. Nomad's way of making a living is through raising animals and farming. Both forms of work require rootedness as well as mobility. 9. In the time of Ibn Khaldun, which was a different historical context, rootedness was not viewed as in opposition to or a negation of mobility/nomadology, but rather each was connected with and constituted the other. Mobility is something that people do, not simply because of a lack of rootedness or a desire to roam the earth, but out of necessity. 10. So the fact that the original concept is not acknowledged but incompletely appropriated, and misappropriated, leads to further misrepresentation of the nomad. In fact, for Ibn Khaldun, nomadology is the norm, not the exception. It is not a trait that belongs to the few. Nomadism is not associated with a violent movement, and violence is not central to nomadism. Nomadism for Ibn Khaldun is more about labor and sustenance, concerns that are central to any human or social organization. 11. He argues that all people, by nature, seek sustenance, and so must move, to different degrees and in different ways, from one place to another in order to labor and survive. They move when there is a lack of resources in the areas they live in, or when their labor is not treated justly. They move because of their desire to explore, experience and connect. The nomad, for Ibn Khaldun, is central to any human social organization. 12. Rather than an exterior element in con-ICT with the city/state as Deleuze and Guattari argue. We also move because of emotional connections when we love someone who lives in a different place. We also move to study in other places. There are many reasons for people to move from one place to another. But in the concept of the nomad articulated by Ibn Khaldun, the nomad can sustain a life in the new place only when he mixes with the local culture. Us, settlers, colonizers and occupiers sooner or later leave. And there are many examples in Al-Muqaddimah that Ibn Khaldun discusses to re-ECT that imposition, occupation, colonization, settler colonialism and oppression don't last forever, because humans by nature are free, and they do not accept slavery and subjection forever, as Ibn Khaldun argues. 13. The important point here is that nomadology/nomadism is not strictly tied to conquest or violence, as Deleuze and Guattari theorize it. Nomadology/nomadism is about seeking refuge as well as about creativity, and at its core is the ontology of a free human. After all, we are told again and again by Western thought that it is only natural to be free as a human. Yet freedom and mobility have, since the rise and dominance of Western modernity, represented the privilege of some. In the case of Palestine, it is the settler who has the privilege of freedom of mobility, taking over the natural habitat of the native, while not only disrupting the natives' lives, but also rupturing the awe of movement and interconnectedness in the region and beyond. So what has disrupted this condition of being human, nomadology, is precisely Western modernity, racism, nation-states, colonialism and, acutely, settler colonialism. One can conclude that it is the settler that has been the practitioner of violence, not the nomad. 235. It would have been more useful and original if Deleuze and Guattari had engaged the work of Ibn Khaldun by taking into account this larger understanding of his concept of nomadology, and engage with its application to the modern state, especially the settler colonial state, given his concept on the human nature of mobility, which for the modern state is an anomaly. In other words, if we follow Ibn Khaldun's theory of human nature, the modern nation-state form goes against the grain of the human in restricting a constitutive element of human nature, that is, mobility. The settler colonial state, in particular, has its own specific dynamic of rupture, which, as in Ibn Khaldun's work, highlights the value of the insights aired by Sayegh into the Zionist colonization of Palestine. In the case of Palestine, the establishment of the Israeli settler colonial state led to a shattering of the Palestinian community and its social organization as they existed prior to 1948, for it dismembered and detached pre-1948 Palestinian society from its Arab surroundings and beyond. Furthermore, through its wars against Arab states, Israel disarticulated the entire region that had for thousands of years been an important meeting point and a key node in the circulation of goods, humans, labor, and ideas extending from Asia and Africa to the Mediterranean and beyond. Furthermore, in this chapter, I also engage with Patrick Wolf's concept of settler colonialism as a structure rather than as an event. I argue that his argument is often misunderstood. It is often presented as a structure that is here to stay. But that is not how I understand it. I understand it as a way to theorize in the field of colonial settler studies compared to colonial studies. Colonialism comes to exploit resources and labor, not to displace people, and not rupture them as settler colonial structures do. But that does not mean that settler colonialism does not exploit local resources and labor. As Ross, 2019, argues, the entire Israeli state was built by native Palestinians. One might say, it is the only settler colonial state that was built by the labor of the natives. It is, in part, the Zionist movement and the Jewish community had no little previous experience of construction or farming. Palestinians thus became the core labor force for the Israeli state in construction and farming. It is a tragic and a sad picture when natives, due to the necessity of survival, build the homes and work in the agricultural fields of the settlers. In this specific case, the settler is sustained by the native, a unique case of settler colonialism. One might also add to Veracini's, 2011, work on settler colonialism many points that were left out within the nature of settler colonialism, but also in restricting the comparison between colonialism and settler colonialism. For example, one might also add an occupation to this theoretical definition. Occupation is short-lived. Among many examples is the German occupation of France during the Second World War. It was intended as a maneuver to win the larger war against the Allied forces. All these, occupation, colonialism, settler colonialism, have things in common such as violence and destruction. While occupation is short-lived, colonization is a longer project, and settler colonialism aims for an even longer period and has specific additional features that Veracini mentions, and there are more. If we make these comparisons, we might better understand Patrick Wolf's concept of structure, which differs in nature and duration. However, connecting Wolf with Ibn Khaldun, this should not mean that it is permanent. They will vanish sooner or later. Finally, in this chapter, I bring in the insights of Frantz Fanon, whose insights into settler colonialism and colonialism are often overlooked and not connected in Studies 236. Of Colonialism and Settler Colonial Studies. Fanon's insights have a lot in common with Sayegh, and with Ibn Khaldun. Sayegh's concept of rupture that I developed further to extend beyond the political, has a lot to do with Fanon's work on how settler colonialism also creates psychological rupture. Psychological rupture is also connected to ideas in Ibn Khaldun's work. Fanon's work drew much from his experience with French settler colonialism in Algeria. It talked about not only the political but also the social and cultural ruptures that French settler colonialism created in Algeria. It is also connected to Ibn Khaldun on mimicry, the psychology of the oppressed. 14 Fanon further connects these ideas in his zero-sum game, it is either the settler or the native. I do not think that it is by accident that the Algerian solution to settler colonialism, elimination of the settlers, is marginalized, if mentioned at all, in settler colonial studies. Furthermore, his insights into the impact of colonization and settler colonialism on the psychology of the native, which has much in common with Ibn Khaldun's idea on mimicry, is also absent. Thus, it is important to connect colonialism and settler colonialism in many ways, one of which is the psychology of the oppressed. Long-term oppression creates a certain behavior among the oppressed, which this chapter will briefly discuss, taking the Palestinian case as an example, and this connecting colonial and settler colonial studies, and what might people understand in post-colonial studies, which is better framed as neo-colonial studies, because Western colonialism never ended, it just took different forms of subjugation, exploitation, and violence. They all have in common the structures of rupture and connections. As a way to illustrate my arguments in the following sections of this chapter, I will briefly clarify what I mean by mobility, connections, and rupture in discussing the local, regional and global impact of Israeli settler colonialism. Although the impact of global Israel is divided into three distinct categories, they share many connections. Local ruptures, displacements and disconnect ions. A key point to note about local ruptures created by Israel is that the displacement of Palestinians started earlier than 1948, especially among farmers who used to live on lands they farmed and who became not only jobless but also homeless as a result of the waves of encroaching Zionist settlements in Palestine during the British colonial rule that began immediately after the First World War. This displacement happened in the context of the sale of lands to Jewish settlers by absentee Palestinian landowners, but more so due to policies of the British colonial government that took over common lands that existed during the Ottoman period and gave them to Jewish settlers. THSA common lands, or Masha in Arabic, were historically used by farmers who cultivated and lived on them, paying taxes to the Ottoman government. Yet, the major event that led to mass displacement took place in 1948 when Zionist military groups who were working to establish the Israeli state drove out about 85% of the Palestinian population from their lands, homes, villages, towns, and cities. THSA Palestinians became refugees in areas outside of the control of the newly created Israeli state, in Gaza, the West Bank, neighboring villages and towns within the state itself, and especially in neighboring countries such as Lebanon, Syria, Jordan and 237. Egypt. This one-way exodus and forced mobility was, and remains, in contrast to the multi-way mobility on the part of the Israeli colonial settler regime and its privileged Jewish settlers. Israel allows and grants automatic entry to Jews from anywhere in the world and continues to prevent the return and entry of displaced and exiled natives. This Israeli law of return that privileges Jews is in contrast to the transfer of local native Palestinians, the denial of the right of return to Palestinian refugees, the restrictions on entry to Palestinians and the restrictions on family unication. While it is important to consider the question of class and gender in the way this displacement affected Palestinian society, the Zionist regime targeted the Palestinian population as a whole without any consideration of religious, social, and economic distinctions within the targeted communities. Old, young, male, female, Muslim, Christian, rich and poor Palestinians face the same fate. Yet, of course, each of these social and economic categories had an impact on the way displaced Palestinians fared after 1948. This system or structure of displacement and restriction on mobility continued to take place and never stopped after 1948. Even after the War of 1948 ended, the Israeli military continued to push Palestinians out of their lands beyond the borders to neighboring states, or within the borders of the state itself. Sometimes whole villages were emptied of their residents who sought refuge in nearby villages and towns, as happened in Ikrit and Kafr Buraim in Galilee. People in these two Palestinian villages were asked to leave by the Israeli military on the pretext of caring for their safety, for the Israeli military claimed that it was getting infiltrators from the Lebanese borders and hence needed to evict those who lived in these two villages in order to clear the ground to GHT those infiltrating across the border. Even after this infiltration ended, residents of these two villages have not been allowed to this date to return to their homes and continue to live as refugees in neighboring villages and towns. Land confiscation and displacement targeting native Palestinians continue to take place from the north to the south of the country. At the same time, more land is given to Jewish settlements, and more Jews from around the world are brought in to take over land and resources. Furthermore, several layers and forms of disconnection have taken place since 1948. Individuals from the neighboring region who came to work in Palestinian cities like Haifa before the establishment of the rigid borders of the settler state, and who intermarried with locals, found themselves trapped. They could no longer travel back and forth across the region as they did before 1948 and they lost all connections to their families and friends in Lebanon and Syria. Those Palestinians who managed to remain on the land and became Israeli citizens over time became disconnected from Lebanon and Syria, with the severing of relationships through commerce and trade as well as historical and cultural ties. Many Palestinian families were dispersed and split as a result of the creation of the Israeli state. THOs who were working in Lebanon or traveling in Lebanon and Syria around 1948 were never allowed to return. Some returned only as dead bodies after their families pleaded with the Israeli authorities to let them at least bury their relatives in the same family cemetery. THOs, their reunification with their families was only possible in death. To this day, the Israeli state continues to issue different laws and regulations preventing its Palestinian citizens from intermarrying with Palestinians from Gaza, the 238. West Bank and elsewhere if they wish to remain citizens of the state, living on what remains of their land. The state thus has been active in disconnecting its Palestinian citizens from the rest of Palestinian society on many levels, including in the domains of emotions and desires. To fall in love with another Palestinian from elsewhere is something that must be carefully calculated for Palestinians inside Israel, because marriage could mean that one either has to leave family to live outside the borders of the Israeli state or have children who will live in legal limbo. The same pattern of fragmentation and disconnection is taking place in Palestinian areas colonized by Israel in 1967 and more acutely in the last few decades. THOs who live in Gaza and it almost impossible to have social relations with people who live in Galilee, Jerusalem, or the West Bank due to the Israeli siege that has caged them into a narrow strip of land. The same is true for Palestinians who live in any of these other areas in relation to Gazans. Jerusalem is very close to Ramallah, yet it is incredibly difficult for two people living in each of these cities to fall in love and want to live together, because if they do, they cannot live in Jerusalem and would have to give up their legal right to live there. It is a huge problem for many Palestinians to just visit one another if they live in a different part of Palestine, for each area or Bantustan has a different legal status imposed on its residents by the Israeli settler colonial state. THSA policies of systematic dismembering of Palestinian society, disconnection from the natural environment and neighboring states, forced removal/mobility and displacement, and depopulation is juxtaposed with the easy mobility to Jewish settlers who can come from any corner of the world to live in Palestine and receive automatic citizenship and rights. They can fall in love and live with whomever they wish, marry freely, travel as they please, and in addition receive state grants, land, and housing. Most have dual citizenship, so they can travel to all Arab countries, including places that native Palestinians used to visit and can no longer enter if they are Israeli citizens. They enlist in the Israeli military and different state security forces that enact different forms of repression and violence against Palestinians and Arabs. I argue that given these realities, the settlers are the true, violent nomads, as in Deleuze's definition, while the condition of the nomad/human, in the true sense of the word, as in Ibn Khaldun's definition, has been wrested from the native Palestinians. What befell Palestinian society after 1948 has also had an impact on peoples living in neighboring states, as I discuss next. Regional ruptures. The rupture and fragmentation that devastated Palestinian society has also transformed and ruptured neighboring societies in various ways. First, masses of Palestinian refugees suddenly descended on the adjacent countries and, in some cases, either outnumbered the local population, as in Jordan, or arrived in numbers that overwhelmed small states, such as Lebanon, with various social, political and economic ramifications. In both countries, the state entered into wars against the Palestinian refugees, whose political organization, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, attempted to GHT the Israeli state in the hope of return to Palestine. Facing reprisals. 239. Invasions and wars by the settler colonial state, the Jordanian state and powerful groups in Lebanon responded with violence against the PLO and the Palestinian refugees on several occasions, trying to survive next door to a powerful bully and aggressive military state supported by world powers and the global economic system. Furthermore, due to the settler colonial nature of the Israeli state, which by definition is a state with open frontiers, which never declared its oficial borders. The neighboring states have experienced Israeli transgressions in different ways since 1948. In addition to the refugees that flooded these countries, they have faced wars, invasions, bombings, and constant attacks. THSA waves of Israeli state violence have led to the occupation of neighboring Arab lands, repression, destruction, and displacement of the populations living near the borders who moved away to avoid the death and destruction leveled against them by the Israeli military. To this day, Lebanese farmers who insisted on remaining on their lands that are near the border with Israel continue to face Israeli aggression, bombings, shelling and even kidnapping. But this was not the only impact, and I have not even mentioned Syrians who fell under Israeli occupation in the Golan Heights, nor discussed the impact on Egypt and Egyptian society. I have restricted the discussion mainly to Lebanon, and specifically around mobility, rupture, and disconnect ions as a way to illustrate my argument about the regional impact of Israeli settler colonialism. Historical, economic, social, and cultural ties that connected people from around the region with Palestine were also ruptured as a result of the creation of Israel. Trade and commerce that linked the peoples in the region prior to 1948 was eroded, and the social ties that had existed since before 1948 were undermined. Cultural and religious ties that connected Christians and Muslims in the region with holy sites in Palestine were diminished. But this local and regional impact is not the end of the story and is in many ways linked to the global rupture. Global ruptures. Palestine served for centuries as a crossroad between Asia, Africa, the Mediterranean, and beyond. It was an important economic node as it lay on the trade route that merchants used to travel through Palestine to other destinations, bringing products from as far away as today's China and India to South Europe and further, and linking regions and continents with social, economic, and cultural outs and alliances. A period of transnational migration and trade with all its exable mobility ended in 1948. By waging war with Arab states and societies, Israel destroyed the historic route that linked all these locations and delinked these societies. Even when Israel tried to establish political and economic relations with states in Asia and Africa, as elsewhere, the main trade item it exported was its arms, technologies of surveillance, and expertise in repression. Israel is thus a key player in the global economy of violence and militarization. 15 Palestine was also transformed from being an important cultural site for those who visited due to religious alienations to a place that became inaccessible to many. While prior to 1948, anyone with the means to travel could visit religious sites in Palestine, 240. After 1948, wealth became a non-factor in mobility and connections to the holy sites. The only factor that enabled travel was the nature of the diplomatic relations between the Israeli state and the state to which travelers belonged. Mobility for non-Palestinians wanting to visit Palestine became selective and restrictive for hundreds of millions of peoples around the world. This rupture was experienced not just by Arabs and Muslims but also by citizens of states that had no diplomatic relations with Israel after 1948 or cut their diplomatic relations in protest of Israeli aggression against Palestinians and Arabs. Many states who opposed Israeli participation in the 1956 invasion of Egypt severed their diplomatic relations at that time, and others did so in response to Israel's war against Arab states in 1967 and the colonization of the remainder of Palestine as well as areas in neighboring Arab countries. The hopes of some and fantasies of others, of the possibilities and potential of the Oslo Accords signed by Israel and the PLO in 1993, ended very soon due to Israel's continuous settlements, expansion and violence. To this day, with each Israeli invasion and war, more diplomatic ties with Israel are cut even by states as far away as Latin America, as during the 2014 invasion of Gaza. For states that re-established relations with Israel after Oslo, these ties remained based on security and intelligence cooperation and are mostly one-way circuits between countries in which Israeli arms, counter-terrorism techniques and surveillance are exported to these places, that is, technologies of death. Israeli tourists, many of whom walk annually to retreats in places such as India after ending their compulsory military service, use these locations in Asia as a therapeutic escape from their violent experiences as soldiers of a colonizing military force, involved in war after war, and in a constant state of repression of native Palestinians, and from a militarized and racist society. There is much more to be said here about the ways in which these ows of arms and tourists resituate Israel and Israeli culture in Asia, as a region that is orientalized by many Israelis as a mystical and spiritual place, and how other societies are being Israelized, contributing to other kinds of ruptures of ties with Palestine as global Israel is consolidated in faraway locations. THSA economic and cultural ruptures also have layered social dimensions. Due to the history of trade and cultural/religious tourism, Palestinian society was enriched by intermarriage with pilgrims and traders and was made ethnically and racially diverse as a result of migration. Older patterns of migration and mobility brought peoples from all around the world, reacted in the racial and phenotypic diversity and names common in Palestine, for example, Hindi for those whose ancestors hailed from India, Irani from Iran, Armani from Armenia, Turkey from Turkey, Catalani from Catalonia, Yani from Greece, or Afghani from Afghanistan. There are many other examples of these histories of migrants/mobile subjects who came to live among the Palestinians, which ended in 1948. Genuine, more human nomadology has been replaced since then by the mobility of settlers and those who claim to be Jews and can enter the lands and further displace the local, native Palestinians. While Israeli settlers, many with dual citizenship, roam around the globe with relative ease, travelers to Israel-Palestine are pro-led, interrogated, and detained at Israeli borders, according to their Arab or Muslim-sounding names, in addition to their political allegiances and involvement. Individuals suspected of being in solidarity with the native Palestinians are always either harassed and detained at entry points or 241. Denied entry and deported. Even those who are allowed to enter are monitored and questioned before their departure by Israeli intelligence and authorities at the airport about the places they visited and the people they met, as a part of the Israeli strategy to restrict mixing and connecting with the native Palestinian community and exposure to the realities on the ground in Palestine. Of course, Palestinians who try to travel across Israeli borders are routinely subjected to this kind of treatment and much worse. Settler colonialism in Palestine not only commands major attention around the globe, and the investment of resources from so many states around the world concerned with this issue one way or the other, but it also creates ruptures for those who feel solidarity with the Palestinian cause and the native Palestinians. One example of such rupture is the question of the Palestinian-led boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement and the growing movement for an academic boycott of Israeli institutions. For example, in the United States, academics can exercise their right to freedom of expression in their intellectual work and can be publicly critical of any society and any state, including the United States itself, without any repercussions in general. However, the slightest criticism of Israel and Israeli society is faced with wholesale attacks, charges of anti-Semitism, and censorship. Academics who display a strong attachment to and solidarity with the Palestinians or express a public critique of the Israeli state can be blocked from getting an academic job or can lose their employment. At the least, they are often defamed, harassed, and disciplined. The recent case of Stephen Salata is one such example of censure and penalization for pro-Palestine speech and boycott activism. Salata, who is a well-known Palestinian-American scholar, attempted to link a similar dynamic of settler colonialism both in the United States and in Israel, accepted and signed a job as a tenured professor from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, resigning from his position as an associate professor at Virginia Tech. But due to his critical scholarly work and vocal criticism of the Israeli state, especially during the 2014 invasion of Gaza, in his publications and media engagements, including social media, and his advocacy of the academic boycott, he was read from his job, in EECT, and left unemployed. After selling his house in Virginia, he and his wife and their child lived temporarily with his parents. Salada and his family were forced to live in limbo just because of his strong critique of the racist and violent policies of the Israeli state. Similar patterns of rupture of scholars' lives due to their solidarity with Palestine take place in many other countries in Europe, Australia, Canada, and elsewhere. Salada's case is a good one to end this part with, as it demonstrates the working of many Zionist groups in repressing critics, and connects the three parts of the impact of settler colonialism in Palestine. Although there are many examples of academic censure and repression similar to the case of Salada, his story illustrates the harsh consequences of the rupture created by the creation of the Israeli settler colonial state. His personal story connects the local, the regional, and the global in an interesting way. He was born to a Palestinian family that was displaced by the creation of the Israeli settler colonial state, becoming refugees who scattered all around the world, to Jordan, the United States and Latin America. His own connection to Palestine and its people was ruptured, his ability to travel to Palestine was restricted by the Israeli authorities, and his academic work was shaped by his roots in Palestine and his experience as an immigrant in the U.S., another 242. Settler colonial state. Notably, Salada's scholarship has always connected these two settler colonies and their indigenous peoples in a critical way. His writing expresses a form of attachment and connection to Palestine and caused him a further rupture of his life in the U.S. Now, Salada's own move to another location to work at another university in the U.S. and his own professional mobility has been disrupted. Salada, like many others, drew the vengeful wrath of those who blindly support the Israeli state and who do not tolerate bold criticism of its policies. But his case also provoked an outpouring of support across the nation among those who felt solidarity and empathy for his fate and his intellectual and political work, sparking a vigorous campaign. Energies and resources are spent by both the Global Israel and the Global Palestine Solidarity campaigns. One wishes to make the rupture in his life and his family life a permanent one, the other is mobilizing to bring back normalcy to his and his family life, and to highlight the assault on academic freedom. Settler colonialism and its psychological impact. One aspect that is common between neocolonialism, colonialism, and settler colonialism is the question of the psychological impact of both on the colonized. Here, I aim to connect these elds and connect Ibn Khaldun with Fanon. Fanon wrote about the non-whites in France and Arabs in Algeria under the French settler colonial structure, and Ibn Khaldun wrote about this issue in general, or one might argue within each system, that is, the less empowered or the marginalized engages in mimicry of the dominant group. Both scholars spoke about how the oppressed, the dominated, or the colonized, due to the feeling of inferiority, engage in mimicry of the colonizer. Both scholars have written on how the subjugated try to tie in the hegemonic structure. Both wrote about how subjugated people think that their defeat, their subjugation, was due to the supremacy of the colonizers and the culture of the colonizer. Even though they did not call it such, and the world was not as globalized as it is today, it is, in essence, trying to tie into white supremacy. The global system has been especially so since the 1990s, a unilateral one dominated by the US and the West in general. People in the non-West want to be as white as possible so that white structure allows them entry into their system. Of course, that mimicry is always a bad copy of the original sick version, as Fanon argues. But in my view, it goes further. Those colonized who try to imitate the colonizer, the West in this case, rupture their connections to their local culture and reality, and by doing so they also open a space for further ruptures within their own communities. In their attempt to connect with the colonizers, in addition to the fact that the colonizers never accept nor respect these attempts, they further help in colonizing their communities. If Africans try to tie into the white system in France or the US, or if Arabs try to tie into the white system in France or the US, or Israel, not only do they never manage to do so, they further help deepen the sense of inferiority. Is especially so when the political, economic, social, and cultural elites do so for the influence they have on the larger community. Furthermore, in the settler colonial structure it is impossible to understand any issue within the colonized subjugated communities without thinking about the 243 psychological sense of inferiority. For example, when writing about the subjugated and the colonized, we need to think of two issues. One issue is the structure and its impact on them. Another is the local factors that feed into it. Violence within the Palestinian community cannot be understood without understanding the structure, the role of the state in promoting and condoning violence within the native community. 17 But that is not enough to explain what is taking place. The sense of inferiority also makes Palestinians direct their violence against one another. The know well that the state will not allow violence toward the Jews, the colonizers, or the settlers. It is not just in violence that the colonized are impacted in the way they conduct their lives economically, politically, and culturally. There are also other issues that we can think of about the impact of colonialism and settler colonialism on the native population and dominated groups' daily life and behavior. Doing so will help us in connecting fields such as colonial studies, settler colonial studies, and Palestinian studies, and can help in healing ruptures that some are old but others that are the product of Western modernity. Fanon wrote about the need to not mimic the sick, racist and violent West, not to try to tee into its economic, political, and social structure, but to destroy it, and to work on creating a new society, a new economic system, a new political system, and help create a new humanity. In the colonial structure, Fanon argued this must come not by mimicry nor by clinging to the past, and the change cannot come from the polluted elites. It must come from the common people, and it will come through the constant work and struggle of the masses. Ibn Khaldun wrote about the need to create a common asabiya, a common group feeling based on economic, political, and social justice. In the globalized world of our time, the imperial, colonial, neocolonial, racist, neoliberal world system, our response is to create a new asabiya, a new world that doesn't aim at clinging to the past nor at mimicking the current system. Conclusion. This chapter is to be seen as an exploration of an approach that aims at reframing and rethinking the question of Israel/Palestine. The Israeli settler colonial case sets itself apart from all other settler colonial cases by its local, regional, and global impact. Mobility, connections, exchanges and normal life of the nomad/human have been since 1948 in constant trials and upheaval. The dominant form of mobility/nomadology that has taken place since then is the violent and repressive one, that of the settler. Hence, the claims that modernity brought ease in mobility and that Israel represents Western modernity in the Orient, while pre-modern times are represented as restricting mobility, can be seen as false in this light. As Collins, 2011, argues in Global Palestine, Palestine can serve and has been serving several global questions and concerns and thus global solidarity for millions of people around the globe who are connected with needs that are normal or natural to every human being, the right to education, to health, to life, access to water, employment, and mobility which is central to all. Global Israel, on the other hand, is the other side of 244. That coin, and it is a structure that ruptures mobility, normalcy, and many basic needs and aspirations of peoples around the world. The more dominant form of mobility since 1948 and as a result of the creation of the Israeli settler colonial state that must be seen as a part of the global dominant West is the mobility of the settler with its borders of violence and repression, arms trade, and technologies of surveillance and militarization that shape Israeli mobility locally, regionally and globally, accompanied by forced mobility and restrictions on mobility for the native Palestinians, as well as restrictions on mobility for peoples in the region and around the world who are deemed unwanted by the Israeli state and the Western-dominated global system. 11. Popular resistance in Palestine. Marwan Darwish. The chapter will trace the thread of Palestinian unarmed resistance to Zionist colonization. Its RST section will highlight resistance to the Jewish immigration to Palestine that took place under the Ottoman and British Mandate until 1948. The second section will discuss Palestinian resistance in the 1948–87 period and explore the everyday resistance of Palestinians in Israel to the military rule imposed on them after 1948 and up to Land Day in 1976. It will also examine the resistance in the West Bank and Gaza Strip that led to the RST Palestinian Intifada in December 1987. The chapter will then discuss the re-emergence of unarmed popular resistance to the apartheid separation wall. The last section will highlight grounds for hope arising from the increased involvement of international grassroots solidarity movements with the Palestinians, inspired by recent events in Jerusalem. The chapter is informed by a body of literature on civil resistance to tyranny and injustice which emphasizes that civil resistance as a mode of challenging oppression relies predominantly on the sustained use of nonviolent, unarmed, or non-military methods in pursuit of aims widely shared in society. There has been a surge in publications about civil resistance in the last decade. However, much of this work draws on the original contributions of Gene Sharp, whose works, 1973, 1980, and 2005, remain pivotal. Chenoweth and Stephan, 2011, won attention for their additional claim that nonviolent forms of resistance to oppressive regimes are more likely to succeed than armed struggle due to their high levels of participation. Yet, most of the studies on unarmed civil resistance have focused on authoritarian domestic regimes, and research focused on colonization and occupation has been limited. S.E. Mellon contributed a crucial insight when he noted that the aim of unarmed resistance to Nazi occupation was never to defeat the occupier by nonviolent struggle but to deny the occupier's claims to legitimacy and the strength to say no. In S.E. Mellon's terms, the act of resistance to occupation is therefore an affirmation of the superiority of the de jure authority over the de facto one. Two Rings, 1982. Study of civilian resistance to, and cooperation with, the occupier has informed. This study's decision to categorize types of resistance to occupation and colonization. The basic assumption informing most studies of nonviolent civil resistance in pursuit of social political change is that all forms of domination are dependent on. 247–248. Various sources of support to maintain the asymmetry of power, including the cooperation, willingly or by force, of sectors of the oppressed society. Repressive regimes depend not only on fear, intimidation, and the coercive power of the state and military but also on the obedience of civilians and their preparedness to maintain the regime by contributing direct forms of revenue. 3. It is important to understand and identify the key pillars of support that function, externally and internally, to maintain the regime in power and then explore ways in which these pillars might be undermined and eroded to exercise leverage and change power relations. 4. Some scholars have emphasized the sine cans of strategies that raise the costs arising for the regime as a result of its oppressive policies and actions. THSA costs can be economic and political, but what Galtung calls shame power is also sine cant as it can reduce the oppressor's moral legitimacy in the eyes of internal and external actors. 5. Martin 2007. Galtung also developed the concept of a chain of nonviolence to refer to the process whereby civil resistance, without being able to impact the oppressive regime directly, can sometimes forge links with others who can, in turn, influence the power structures that are being challenged. Sharps, 2005, Work and Rings, 1982, Study of Civilian Resistance to Occupation inform the framework for types of nonviolent action set out here, which will be used throughout this chapter. 1. Symbolic resistance, we remain who we are and communicate to others, by means of gestures, actions, and dress, our continued allegiance to our cause and its values. 2. Polemical resistance, we oppose the occupier by voicing protest and trying to encourage others of the need to maintain the struggle. 3. Offensive resistance, we are prepared to do all that we can to frustrate and overcome the oppressor by nonviolent means, including carrying out strikes, demonstrations, and other forms of direct action. 4. Defensive resistance, we aid and protect those in danger and preserve human beings and values endangered by the occupier. 5. Constructive resistance, we challenge the existing imposed order by seeking to create alternative institutions that embody our values. Palestinian resistance to the establishment of the Israeli state. TH's section traces the thread of Palestinian unarmed resistance against colonialism and the expropriation of Palestinians' land and the threat to their livelihoods posed by Jewish migration prior to the establishment of the State of Israel. What becomes clear is that the struggle against the Zionist project from the late 19th century to the middle of the 20th century was dogged right from the start by factionalism and division that reacted, in part, the fractured nature of Palestinian society. Jewish migration to Palestine that occurred in order to establish a homeland commenced in the 1880s, at which time the Jewish community in Palestine numbered around 24,000, percent of an estimated population of 500,000. By the end of the popular resistance in Palestine 249. Second wave of Zionist immigration in 1914, the Jewish population had risen to 85,000 and, as early as 1886, there were reports of clashes between Jewish settlers and the peasants evicted from their land. 6. By the end of the Ottoman period of rule, a pattern of protest had formed. Traditional land-owning families saw Zionism as a threat to their position and responded by appealing to the Ottoman authorities to act as intermediaries. More polemical forms of protest, newspaper articles, leets etc., were the domain of the middle-class professionals, with journalists and students being particularly vocal in their opposition. More directly confrontational modes of protest aimed at disrupting the territorial acquisitions of the incomers were primarily used by the direct victims of Zionist land purchases, the peasantry. 7. Kiley summarized the situation prior to the establishment of British military rule in Palestine in 1917 actively when he noted that within the ranks of the nationalist movement in Palestine, the notables performed the role of the diplomats, the educated middle classes that of the articulators of public opinion, and the peasants that of the actual actors in the battle against the Zionist presence. 8. In November 1917, the British government read in the Balfour Declaration its support for the establishment of a homeland for the Jews in Palestine, provided that nothing should be done to prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. 9. When news of the declaration reached the Palestinians, it prompted a new awareness of the need to organize. A Muslim, Christian Association, MCA, was established with branches around the country to counter similar Jewish organizations, and a national day of protest to mark the declaration's RST anniversary was held on November 2, 1918. 10. A number of salient features characterize the RST decade of British rule in Palestine when it is examined through the prism of unarmed resistance and mobilization. Spontaneous clashes between peasantry and Jewish settlers. For the peasantry who experienced eviction through Jewish land purchases, the immediate response was anger and resentment that sometimes led to clashes with those directly responsible for their dispossession, but these clashes were localized, and at no point were there serious attempts to create a nationwide movement of active resistance based on the peasantry. Absence of a coherent national leadership. Main reasons for the failure to develop a truly active national movement were twofold. First, the worldview of the peasantry was localized. THEY had no experience of coordinating collective action beyond their own villages. Secondly, there was no national leadership to direct them along such a path. A major fracture between two of the most notable and influential Jerusalem-based families, the Husaynis and the Nashashivis, militate against the emergence of a uni-ed leadership. Furthermore, the urban political elite and the peasantry occupied completely different social spheres. Not only did the indigenous ruling class have no experience of mass leadership, but 250. The individual notable would never attempt such a course since it would only jeopardize his access to government. 11. Commitment to negotiation. Throughout the mandate period, the main impulse of the Palestinian political elite was to continue in the role they had traditionally performed under the Ottomans, representing only their own interests to the authorities. Prevalence of symbolic and polemical resistance in the absence of any national-level popular movement of unarmed resistance, A plenitude of dispersed but collective forms of symbolic and polemical protest emerged. Regular items in the press urged people to oppose Zionists. Imams spread the message in mosques at Friday prayers, and strike days were observed to mark the anniversary of the Balfour Declaration and commemorate other days of national significance. The timidity of the Palestinian political elite. In 1922, the British announced plans to establish a legislative council with very limited powers. At a congress held in Nablus in August 1922, it was resolved to boycott the upcoming elections. The boycott was effective and the Legislative Council never met. However, when, in the spring of 1923, it was proposed that further leverage should be exerted by withholding tax payments, landowners rejected the move, fearing punitive Britishness. Religion helped to generate resistance. Religious tensions were on the rise in the run-up to 1928, as the Jews sought to extend their control and worship at Al-Burak, adjacent to the Al-Haram al-Sharif. Reports abounded that the Jews had designs on the space and had erected a partition. On August 15, 1929, the presence of Zionist extremists at the Western Wall provoked a counter-demonstration by Palestinians, and Palestinian leaders mobilized people around the perceived threat to one of their most sacred spaces. On the following Friday, August 23, 1929, worshippers emerging from Al-Aqsa Mosque clashed with Jews in the Old City, and 133 Jews and 116 Arabs were killed and over 500 wounded. 12 violence spread, and, by the next day, 67 Jews had been killed in Hebron, despite the efforts of many Palestinian families who opened their homes to shelter Jewish residents. 13. 1930-36, from unrest to the RST Palestinian uprising. Harsh measures meted out by the British, which included collective punishments for whole villages and neighborhoods, fueled bitterness and strengthened the hand of those calling for armed resistance. Tensions continued to rise throughout the popular resistance in Palestine. 251. 1930s, as a worsening economic situation and the suffering of the Palestinians was exacerbated by further increases in Jewish immigration and the Jewish boycott of Arab labor. Clashes between Palestinians and Jews grew in frequency and seriousness, and on April 20, 1936, the call went out for a national strike. To enhance its coordination, an Arab Higher Committee, AHC, was formed, headed by Haj Amin Husseini. This was the start of the RST Palestinian uprising, which lasted from 1936 to 1939. The uprising had two phases. In the RST period, which lasted for 6 months from April to October 1936, unarmed forms of resistance including protest marches and demonstrations, strikes and boycotts and non-cooperation and civil disobedience were dominant. THSA activities were complemented by attempts to involve wider constituencies of support from neighboring Arab countries. By July, the Nablus district was in full revolt, with Nablus at its center. Matters were far beyond the control of the nominal Palestinian political leadership, which was coming under increasing pressure from citrus growers to end the strike so that their harvest could be gathered. 14. It was agreed that, if the Arab leaders issued an appeal to end the strike, then their wishes would be followed. When the appeal was made on October 10, 1936, the AHC called for the strike to end that same day. Following the strike's cessation, the British appointed a commission of inquiry led by Lord Peel and proposed partition, which was rejected out of hand by the AHC. This marked the outbreak of the uprising's second phase. A protest strike was called, and by mid-October armed groups were roaming the countryside attacking Jewish settlements and cutting communication lines. An examination of the key factors that led to the collapse of the uprising reveals persistent and fundamental weaknesses that have continued to undermine the Palestinian struggle. 1. Notable families in Palestine had vested interests, and so, as the revolt intensified, their paramount aim became to defend their property, wealth, status, and influence. They prioritized the protection of their personal and family interests above those of the nation. 2. To a significant degree, the dominant political class that comprised the Palestinian leadership believed it was imperative to maintain good relations with the authorities, so that they might exercise their powers of persuasion at negotiating tables. Again and again, representations were made to the British, delegations sent to London and memoranda scripted. Palestinian elites failed to grasp the absolute commitment of the British to the Zionist project of establishing a Jewish national home in Palestine. 3. Economic impact of the general strike was limited in part because there was a whole sector of society, the Jewish community, that continually worked to provide for the basic needs of the Jewish sector. Real suffering was borne by the strikers themselves. 4. Palestinians were unable to rectify the severe asymmetries that limited their social and political leverage. Our appeals for interventions from Arab and Muslim leaders beyond Palestine fell on deaf ears. 252. 5. Suppression of the revolt was brutal and extreme, and the British authorities ensured that Palestinians paid a high price for the revolt. During the partition period, members of the AHC were in exile or jail, and the members of local-level cadres who were not in prison were exhausted and demoralized. Zionists channeled Jewish refugees from Europe to Palestine in order to create facts on the ground and prove the necessity of a Jewish homeland. On February 25, 1947, the British announced they were handing over responsibility for Palestine to the UN, which later created the Special Committee on Palestine, UNSCOP, to carry out its inquiries. UNSCOP was boycotted by the Arab League, to which the enfeebled AHC had handed over its negotiating rights, and on 2 November the Union General Assembly passed Resolution 181 in favor of partition. By the end of 1948, the Nakba for the Palestinians was total. More than 400 villages had been destroyed, around 90% of the Palestinian population had been displaced and dispossessed, and the social, economic, and political fabric of their society had been destroyed. 15. In the new state of Israel, all immigration restrictions were lifted for Jews, who lived in and occupied the land and properties of the indigenous Palestinians. When we review this period of partition, it seems as if the fate of the Palestinians had moved out of their hands. Bigger forces were at play, as the British and the United Nations allied with a vigorous and driven Zionist movement, granting legitimacy to its colonialist goal of creating a Jewish state. Palestinian Resistance, 1948–87. Zurich, 2016, in his analysis of Israel's colonial project in Palestine, argues that its foundation is based on dispossession of the indigenous population through violence, repressive state laws and practices, and racial forms of monitoring. He demonstrates that territoriality determines individual mobility and access to land, while economic viability highlights how territoriality and biopolitics intersect at various levels to advance the state's racial agenda. Between the Nakba and the establishment of the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, in 1964, there was virtually no significant manifestation of organized public Palestinian resistance of any sort, and most of the forms of resistance they expressed were quiet and hidden in their nature for reasons that are not hard to end. 1. Colonialism, dispossession, and division. Palestinian society had been devastated and fragmented by the Nakba. 2. Trauma of loss. Whilst they were scattered and separated from each other, Palestinians were also disempowered by the deep trauma and shock sustained by those with a deep attachment to place who found themselves uprooted, no longer a majority in their own homeland but relegated to minority and subordinate status. 3. Priority of economic survival. For most Palestinians reduced to poverty and subordination, the priority was survival and particularly economic survival. Popular resistance in Palestine 253. Palestinians in Israel, quiet forms of resistance. After the establishment of the State of Israel, about 160,000 Palestinians remained within the borders of the newly established settler colonial state living as an alien group. Zurich, 1979, used the theory of internal colonialism to show how Israel destroyed Palestinian socio-economic institutions and their way of life and subjected them to direct military control and surveillance for almost 2 decades. In many ways, Palestinians became a forgotten people, but it would be wrong to view them as mere passive victims of fate during those decades of life in the new state. THEY engaged initially in quiet forms of resistance to preserve whatever autonomy they could and as they strove to survive in the face of the harsh living conditions that accompanied their displacement and dispossession. 16. In many ways the Palestinians in Israel in the years immediately following the Nakba could be described, to use Bayet's phrase, as a social non-movement conducting the collective actions of non-collective actors. 17 activities that constituted types of quiet resistance were undertaken by individuals and their families rather than by uni-ed groups. However, some limited direct collective action was organized against military rule and in support of the Pan-Arab Movement 18, and it manifested itself in the following forms. Determination to stay in their homeland. Destruction of hundreds of entire villages and the accompanying infrastructure resulted in a humanitarian crisis, and perhaps the quietest form of resistance found expression in the determination and resilience of the Palestinians to stay in their homeland, whatever suffering they incurred. 19. Resistance through cultivation. Large areas of land were confiscated or designated as closed military areas to which Palestinian entry was restricted, but local people found ways to circumvent these restrictions in order to cultivate their crops. Culture, identity, and resistance. Palestinians in Israel utilized various forms of symbolic resistance to the occupation aimed at preserving their culture and identity. For example, in 1949, the village of Al-Fahim was handed over to Israel by the Jordanian forces, and the residents were instructed to celebrate the arrival of the Israeli army with singing and dancing. To express their resistance and dance, older women made their faces black with charcoal and sang songs expressing their sorrow and anger rather than joy. This was an early instance of Palestinians in Israel expressing their opposition to Israeli military rule through songs and other cultural forms of resistance, and it indicates that Arab and Palestinian culture became a means to highlight national identity. 2254. Resistance to restrictions on movement. Israeli authorities imposed curfews and other measures to control the movement of Arab residents, and the targets of these measures explored ways to bypass these controls. THEPLO. In 1950, Cairo student Yasser Arafat set up a union of Palestinian students with some friends. A short while later in Beirut, a medical student, George Habash, set up another student group known as the Arab National Movement. Grassroots organizations were also being established in the Gaza Strip, and by the mid-1950s a network of nationalist organizations was beginning to emerge. The main resistance organization, Fatah, grew out of this network to become the dominant force within the PLO, which was formed in 1964. In 1967, the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza rang the death knell of Palestinian faith in Pan-Arabism as a vehicle for liberation, and this boosted the fortunes of Fatah, which then became the prime agency of the Palestinian national movement. Looking back on the period prior to the RST Intifada through the lens of unarmed popular resistance, a number of features can be highlighted. The glory cation of armed struggle. It was with the rise of Fatah and the PLO that the iconic gur of the Palestinian Gdr with the Kalashnikov Re'i became established as a symbol of Palestinian resistance that would hold sway in subsequent decades. A Palestinian state was to be achieved through armed struggle. Palestinians as victims. Palestinian history was presented as a narrative of heroic struggle undertaken against Zionism and by a people betrayed by traditional leaders and paradise Arab states, a worldview which situated the asymmetrical power relationship between Israelis and Palestinians as the grounds for absolving Palestinians from responsibility for their failures. The portrayal of defeat as triumph. Khalidi, 1997, has pointed to a related peculiarity of the Palestinian experience, the manner in which failures came to be portrayed as victories or at least as examples of heroic perseverance against impossible odds. Shift S in the Palestinian political center of gravity during the years when the PLO, and Fatah in particular, was a burgeoning force, the Palestinian political center of gravity shift ed. After 1967, this center moved from popular resistance in Palestine 255 Palestine to the refugee camps in Jordan, and after 1970 it shifted to Lebanon. THEPLO saw refugees as potential recruits for the armed liberation struggle, and its focus on the refugees distanced the organization from the Palestinians in the occupied territories, a separation heightened by the communication problems that worsened after the 1967 war and the ensuing Israeli occupation. Palestinians in Israel, from quiet resistance to audible protest. By the early 1960s, Palestinians in Israel had started to move on from quiet and, to a large extent, hidden forms of resistance to more audible and open forms of protest. Sadi, in his forensic study of the genesis of Israeli policies during this period, argues that the purpose of military rule was to maintain political and security control and social segregation of the Arab community in Israel. 21 Zurich, 2016, further highlighted the relationship between colonialism and biopolitics as key to governance, demonstrating the importance of territory in the operation of surveillance and control. The Israeli Communist Party, ICP, predominantly comprised of Palestinian members, was a key vehicle for early campaigns against the restrictions and discriminatory practices imposed on the Arab population within Israel. As such, the ICP and the Al-Arad movement played important roles, not only in the struggle for full equality for the Arab minority, but also in the maintenance of an Arab national identity, and consequently they became the political home of leading Arab intellectuals, writers, and poets. The occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip had the paradoxical EECT of uniting Palestinians from both sides of the Green Line after years of separation. It enabled Palestinians in Israel to renew family relations and commercial links that had been severed since 1948, but this new situation also exposed Palestinians in Israel to the Palestinian national movement and its PLO-led struggle in the occupied Palestinian territory. TH's so-called reunification led to growing recognition of Palestinians' shared history, as well as to a burgeoning consciousness of the Palestinian national identity they held in common. 22 During the 1970s, Palestinians in Israel witnessed the emergence of new movements and civil society organizations which sought to articulate and represent their interests. One of the many groups that emerged was the National Committee for the Defense of Arab Lands, NCTL, which was formed in 1975 as a coalition of various political groupings and community-based organizations in an effort to oppose land confiscations by the state. NCTL called for the RST national strike by Palestinians in Israel on Land Day on March 30, 1976, during which 6 protesters were killed by the Israeli police. 23 After years of military rule and relatively quiet resistance, Land Day represented the RST act of mass, organized civil resistance by the Palestinians inside Israel. After years during which Palestinians had been actively ostracized by the PLO leadership and Arab states, the Land Day protests marked a significant acknowledgement that the Palestinians within Israel were part of the Palestinian nation. THEIR acts of hidden, uncoordinated and quiet resistance against military rule and oppression had been transformed into new forms of open, widespread, organized and nonviolent resistance that Israel, the PLO, and the Arab states could no longer ignore. 256. Palestinians in the occupied territories prior to the RST Intifada. The message these developments embodied for the Palestinians in the occupied territories became clear: stay steadfast and eventually you will be liberated as a consequence of the pressure generated by the PLO and its external allies. In truth, their own allotted role was a passive one. The space available for organizing any form of collective resistance to the occupation was severely circumscribed, and any signs of opposition to the occupation were met with severe repression by Israel. The emergence of any coordinated leadership that could organize resistance to the occupation within the Palestinian territories was hampered by the Israeli tactic of deporting any suspected resistance leaders, but it was also exacerbated by the PLO leadership's suspicion of any potential rivals to its own authority emerging in that space. Denied the opportunity to express themselves through any overtly political organization, activists within the occupied territories established other vehicles for education and mobilization. Student and professional associations, trade unions, women's societies, social and cultural associations and other grassroots organizations were formed that served as agencies for both offensive and constructive resistance, organizing and mobilizing the people whilst also providing the basic services that were not provided by the Israeli occupiers. Consequently, these grassroots organizations gained the allegiance of the majority of the Palestinian population and came to constitute the nucleus of an alternative structure of authority and power to rival that of the Israeli military government. In 1987, the Palestinian Communist Party was newly admitted into the ranks of the PLO. TH's display of unity provided the necessary basis for the kinds of coordination and cooperation between different nationalist factions within the occupied territories that became manifest with the outbreak of the RST Intifada. THERST Intifada, December 1987 to October 1991. When considering the RST Intifada through the lens of popular unarmed resistance and mobilization, it is useful to distinguish between two phases, the RST from late 1987 through to early 1990 and the second from mid-1990 to the Madrid Peace Conference of October 1991. Phase 1, December 1987 to 1990, the struggle's horizontal escalation. The outbreak of the uprising came as a surprise to the leadership of the PLO in their headquarters in Tunis, and they were even more surprised by its scale and its coordinated nature, which had been enabled through the creation of a United National Command, UNC, that represented the different political factions. TH's clandestine body attempted to coordinate resistance through regular communiques and LEETS. THEUNC was supported by an organizational infrastructure of popular committees in villages, towns, and refugee camps, and together they took on the character of an popular resistance in Palestine. 257. Embryonic state, coordinating activities and administering the provision of basic services. In the months following the outbreak of the Intifada, this organizational framework, organically linked to various groupings within Palestinian society, facilitated mass social mobilization and a horizontal escalation of the struggle which embraced all sectors of society. The authority of the UNC and the popular committees became evident during the RST phase of the Intifada because of the solidarity demonstrated in response to strike calls and requests for merchants to restrict their opening hours to mornings only on non-strike days. As part of its attempt to undermine the authority of the Israeli occupiers, the UNC also called on all those Palestinians who worked for the Israeli administration to resign, prompting a significant positive response, and Palestinians referred to this process as cleaning out our national home. 24 Less visible, but just as powerful as these confrontations, were the constructive community actions that were integral to the RST phase of the Intifada. When people began to sue economic hardship, as a consequence of disengaging from the Israeli economy, losing income through participation in strikes, and boycotting Israeli produce, families and communities began to become more self-reliant. Households cultivated vegetable plots and reared poultry, for example, and women's committees became highly active in promoting new forms of home-based economic activity. Homes also became bases for clandestine education classes that were held as a means of countering the Israeli closure of schools and colleges. Phase 2, Post-1990 Deterioration. By the summer of 1990, it was clear that much of the vigor and drive of the uprising had gone. Analysis of this phase suggests a number of reasons for this deterioration. The relative failure of disengagement and non-cooperation. Palestinians hoped that their direct opposition and non-cooperation would raise the costs of the occupation to such a level that the Israelis would consider withdrawing. The weakness of this plan was that, historically, Israel has sought to control the territory of the Palestinians, not the people. Palestinian cooperation was not, therefore, required to maintain the occupation, and this seriously weakened the impact of the unarmed resistance. Escalating costs of resistance. In many ways, the Palestinians were more dependent on Israel than the other way round. Israel could end replacements for the Palestinians who withdrew their labor, but the Palestinians could not end alternative sources of employment and income. Moreover, the Israeli economy remained the only source for many of the basic necessities of life within the occupied Palestinian territories and, as the months passed, the costs of resistance borne by everyday Palestinians rose. 258. Parallel emphases on shame. Power 25 and vertical escalation attempts to provoke shame and evoke sympathy from the Israeli public through swearing and efforts to force Israel to consider withdrawal by increasing the costs of continued occupation were inactive. Conversion and coercion used as simultaneous strategies might even be said to have cancelled each other out, reducing the vulnerability of sympathetic Israelis to shame. Power. Fragmentation of resistance and the weakening of political control. One of the strengths of the Intifada lay in the coordination between the different political factions achieved through the UNC and the Popular Committee's structure. However, by 1990, not only were the tensions between the different factions increasing in the light of the perceived weaknesses of the unarmed struggle and the temptations of vertical escalation, but the majority of the experienced activists who had been able to maintain cohesion in the struggle had been apprehended and imprisoned, or deported, by Israel. Apathy of third parties and the impact of external events. Palestinians lacked the power to impact on the self-interests of the US and other international actors and thereby push them to intervene constructively in the Con-ICT. Gulf War in 1990 intensified the hardship and the suffering of the Palestinians, as well as their bitterness. By mid-1991, more Palestinians were being killed by Palestinians than by Israel, as anger and resentment turned against those suspected of collaboration and betrayal of the uprising. 26 Palestinians within Israel were quick to show their solidarity with the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza Strip after the outbreak of the RST Intifada. A general strike designated as Peace Day was called on December 21, 1987. Strike call met with a solid response in the Arab towns and villages and was accompanied by protest marches and demonstrations that led to clashes with the police and the arrest of over 100 protesters. Strike actions and demonstrations continued throughout the Intifada's early years, with the largest taking place in Nazareth and having a reported 50,000 participants. 27 support also took on a more substantive form with people organizing relief committees for the provision of humanitarian aid and supplies for delivery across the Green Line. Intifada had a significant impact on the Palestinians in Israel. There was a deep sense of pride and admiration for their fellow nationals resisting the occupation, and this strengthened the sense of shared identity with those living in the occupied territories. Oslo Process, September 1993 to September 2000. Peace negotiations commenced in October 1991 with a conference in Madrid which led, eventually, to the September 1993 signing of the Oslo Accords. Rhetoric. Popular resistance in Palestine. 259. Of the Accords preamble was, in hindsight, hyperbolic. The reality that unfolded on the ground was a salutary experience for all those who dared to dream of the just and lasting and comprehensive peace settlement alluded to in the declaration. As said, 2004, argued, the Palestinian AGIES over the Gaza Strip and Jericho without sovereignty, while Israel controls the borders, dictates security arrangements and controls the economy. What followed was a cycle of violence fueled on the Palestinian side by a growing sense of frustration at the lack of substantive progress towards the realization of any significant peace dividend. On its part, Israel continued to negotiate from a position of strength, imposing its demands on its weaker partner and resorting to targeted assassinations, collective sanctions, new expropriations of land for settlements, and other facts on the ground, whilst ratcheting up the pressure on the Palestinian Authority, PA, to deal with the violence. The result was an interim agreement, signed on September 28, 1995, that became known as Oslo II. It divided the West Bank into 3 administrative divisions, categorized as Areas A, B and C, each of which was to enjoy a different degree of Palestinian self-government. The combined impact of these developments was to bring about a set of conditions that undermine the possibility of launching any new mass participation unarmed resistance movement against the occupation. THEPA had been tasked by Israel and its international backers to act as the agent responsible for controlling dissent within the Palestinian community, and so it was directly involved in maintaining the occupation. 28. 2 people within the elite Palestinian political and socio-economic strata were developing vested interests in the occupation status quo. 3. The breakup of the West Bank into different zones increased the socio-geographical fragmentation of the Palestinians, not least because of the obstacles to free movement created by the Israeli road-building program. 4. The leverage that could be exerted over Israel by Palestinian non-cooperation was minimal, as Israel reduced its reliance on Palestinian labor and markets. 5. Potential leaders for any coordinated unarmed popular movement were lacking. Cadres that had been involved in the Intifada followed different trajectories, but 2 career paths were common for their members. Some joined the new PA and others established or joined non-governmental organizations concerned with themes like democratization and peace building, invariably funded by foreign donors. 29. The Second Intifada. The Al-Aqsa Intifada began in September 2000, following Ariel Sharon's provocative entry into the Haram al-Sharif area, but the deeper cause was the build-up of frustration, resentment, and anger resulting from 7 years of a peace process that only served to deepen Palestinian dispossession and deprivation whilst strengthening the Israeli occupation. The malfunctioning of the PA and the cronyism that was its dominant feature only served to deepen the feeling that something must be done. 260. The rapid militarization of the uprising reacted to some degree the emergence of a younger and more militant generation of activists who were influenced by the example of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, whose guerrilla tactics had succeeded in forcing Israel to withdraw in May 2000. Within a short while, every Palestinian faction, secular and Islamic, had spawned its own armed militia, each seeking to contribute to the collapse of the occupation through armed struggle. Among these groupings, the armed wing of Hamas re-emerged and took its GHT beyond the borders of the occupied territories into Israel itself with suicide bombings that provoked massive Israeli retaliation. Amidst the carnage and the associated destruction of the socio-economic fabric of Palestinian society, there was none of the space there had been in the RST Intifada for any large-scale unarmed resistance. The main points of contrast between the RST and the Second Intifadas are summarized in Table 11.1. On September 30, 2000, the Palestinian leadership in Israel called for a general strike to protest the killing of Palestinians in the Al-Aqsa compound the previous day. Demonstrations spread across the Arab towns and villages in the Galilee and Triangle areas over the following days. The response of the Israeli police was extreme and violent. THEY used live ammunition, resulting in the death of 13 protesters. What pulled Palestinians out onto the streets of their villages was televised murder, relayed again and again on Arab TV, of 12-year-old Mohammed al-Dora at the Netzarim junction in Gaza after 45 minutes of continuous Israeli army And what put rocks into their hands was the lethal response of the Israeli police, for whom there has never been a green line as far as their Palestinians are concerned. 30. The strength of the response reacted the level of support for those Palestinians resisting the occupation, but it also grew from the deep sense of frustration felt by the Palestinian minority at the racist discriminatory treatment they experienced as marginalized second-class citizens of Israel. Indeed, the lethal force used by the Israeli Table 11.1 Main points of contrast between the RST and the Second Intifadas. First Intifada, Second Intifada. Predominantly unarmed resistance, predominantly armed/violent resistance, mass civilian involvement, civilians con net to support functions, cohesion and unity via popular committees, fragmentation, With power falling to local militias predominantly secular, increasingly religious in character, attempts to influence the Israeli public through dialogue, shame, power, etc. Attempts to influence the Israeli public through force, intimidation, and fear. Active support from Israeli human rights and peace groups. Limited role for Israeli peace groups in the context of ongoing suicide bombings. Significant international support and third-party pressure towards ending the occupation, particularly after September 11, 2001. Resistance is viewed through the lens of the War on Terror. Popular resistance in Palestine. 261. Police only served to highlight the manner in which the whole community was discriminated against. 31. If one can summarize the Palestinian take on what lay behind October 2000, it would be to say that this was an institutional use of state power to deliver a message to a footage of its population: be docile and accept your status as second-class citizens, or encounter the wrath of the army and security forces. 32. A new development during this period was the emergence of Arab and Jewish groups in Israel opposed to the construction of the separation wall and in support of the Palestinian struggle to end the occupation. Apartheid wall and the re-emergence of unarmed popular resistance. Suicide bombings and associated targeting of Israeli civilians provided the Israeli government with the rationale to justify its decision to embark on the building of a physical wall between the West Bank and Israel, which it claimed was designed to keep the bombers out. 33. Construction of the apartheid wall commenced in the spring of 2002, and by September 2003 it had become a focus of international attention. It was clear that, whilst the Israeli government justified the construction of the wall in terms of Israel's security needs, its route was also determined by the desire to expropriate even more Palestinian land and impose an additional layer of suffering on the Palestinians. Within a very short time, the wall had impacted deleteriously on the lives of tens of thousands of Palestinians who were denied access to their elds, prevented from reaching their places of work and forced to travel circuitous routes and negotiate armed checkpoints either to get to their land, schools, universities, or medical centers, or simply to visit family and friends. It was the imposition of this new, direct, and visible challenge to their well-being that provoked a wave of popular unarmed resistance amongst those most directly affected. An analysis of popular resistance between 2003 and 2014 makes it clear that at no stage was there anything comparable to a mass movement of protest. Instead, a series of local centers emerged for active unarmed resistance against the construction of the apartheid wall and land expropriation. At the height of the popular resistance during 2010 and 2011, there was some form of organized unarmed resistance against the ongoing occupation in a maximum of 40 or foot-wide villages and neighborhoods. Centers of resistance changed over time and, as the construction of the apartheid wall progressed, new hotspots emerged. Some of these pockets of resistance, like those at Budrus and Bilin, gained an international pro-le at the peak of their resistance, but this declined with the passage of time. In 2013, a senior political guru in the Bethlehem area identified some of the weaknesses of the unarmed protest aimed at ending the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territory. 262. Some of the leaders have a personal interest in the status quo. So this is part of the cycle of mistrust. People want to see their leaders to the fore, as an example to people on the ground. At the moment popular resistance is very localized, every Friday the same few villages, the same thing. It is not popular as it does not include the mass of people. If we were serious, we would make life hell for the settlers, blocking the roads, making the soldiers work. It would be popular resistance. 34. Lack of social solidarity and the weakness of contemporary popular unarmed protest. Recent unarmed resistance has struggled to combat the expansion of the Israeli occupation, and it is clear that a major factor has been the erosion of any significant sense of social solidarity and cohesion amongst Palestinians during the decades of the new millennium. There are many reasons for this deepening of horizontal and vertical divisions among the Palestinian people, but they include 1. Geopolitical fracturing that occurred as part of the Oslo process and with the division of the West Bank into areas A, B and C. 2. The blockages that obstruct easy communication and movement between the areas, particularly between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and the siege of Gaza, which has exacerbated their effects. 3. Political fractures, and particularly the division between Hamas and Fatah that reached its nadir in 2007 when Hamas took control of the Gaza Strip by force. 4. The economic impoverishment of large numbers of Palestinians who can no longer end employment in Israel, which has resulted in them prioritizing the satisfaction of basic needs above participation in a common struggle for a distant goal like the end of the occupation. 5. Widespread disillusionment with the cronyism and corruption that has permeated the Palestinian Authority and which has fed a countrywide lack of trust in those seeking to act as leaders. 6. Harsh Israeli punishments and sanctions enforced on activists who participate in the popular protest. From Gaza to Jerusalem. Jerusalem has been the focus of several campaigns that seek to resist the eviction of Palestinians and the imposition of further Israeli control. The installation of electronic gates to regulate the entrance of worshippers to Al-Aqsa Mosque triggered an outbreak of protest in July 2017 that lasted for 3 weeks, and generated mass mobilization of thousands of people who participated in the campaign's sit-ins. Palestinians from East Jerusalem and from Israel took leading roles in this struggle, which successfully forced Israel to remove the electric gates by the end of July. 35. Another Sinai Can't campaign, Gaza's Great March of Return, began on March 30, 2018, and involved weekly demonstrations along the east border of the Gaza Strip. Popular Resistance in Palestine 263. Inspired other Palestinians to organize similar events, and Palestinians in Gaza demonstrated every Friday to highlight the right of the Palestinian refugees to return. TH's ongoing campaign emphasized civil unarmed popular resistance and exposed the Israeli army's violent responses to unarmed protests. The Al-Khan al-Amr campaign, near Jerusalem, aimed to prevent the displacement of the Bedouin community for a second time. They had resettled after been evicted from their original homes during the Nakba in 1948. TH's campaign, led by popular committees, is an example of an all-Palestinian protest carried out with the support of Israeli solidarity organizations and the diplomatic community in East Jerusalem, and in the end the Israeli authorities were forced to retract their plans. The important role of third-party solidarity, grounds for hope. Perhaps the most significant feature of popular resistance in the period following the Second Intifada has been the increased involvement of internationals as accompaniers, co-participants in actions, and as activist tourists expressing their solidarity with Palestinians through their presence on the ground. The significance of the contribution made by these overseas activists has been threefold. 1. Their presence has created a kind of protective shield for Palestinian protesters. It serves as an act of witness that indicates solidarity, but it also puts the Israeli authorities under a type of surveillance. 2. They have established linkages between Palestinians and wider activist networks around the world. 3. On their return home, these international activists serve as powerful advocates of the Palestinian cause amongst networks and groupings in their own countries. One outcome of this trend has been an expansion of the international grassroots movement of solidarity with the Palestinian struggle. Th's loose movement of movements has become one of the primary vehicles for implementing a Palestinian initiative that emerged out of a meeting of Palestinian civil society organizations in July 2005, the call for a worldwide boycott, divestment and sanctions, BDS, campaign against Israel. 36. There would appear to be increasing numbers of people and organizations around the world who agree that the continued Israeli occupation, the blockade, and the virtual imprisonment of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip constitutes a gross and unacceptable violation of basic human rights and international law about which something must be done. 37. Despite the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, which in many ways limited social and political interaction, 2020/21 saw accelerated growth in BDS campaigns, successful grassroots actions and significant legal victories for Palestinian rights. 38. Writers, singers, artists, and other celebrities endorsed the rights of the Palestinians. and pension funds around the world dumped Israeli RMS from their investment portfolios over Israel's human rights abuses and international law violations. Cultural gurus refused to cross the picket line, and the global ice cream manufacturer Ben & Jerry's pulled its 264 products from illegal Israeli settlements. A wave of protests were carried out under the banner of #BlockTheVote, and activists and workers in several ports around the world prevented Israeli cargo ships from docking. In these acts, there are grounds for hope. On their own, the Palestinians lack sufficient leverage to shift the Israelis' stance and achieve a substantive and self-sustaining peace, but we are now in an age where transnational social movements exercise an influence on communities around the world and hence upon political leaders and decision-makers. 39 There is no reason why the BDS campaign and international solidarity movements cannot grow into a force for change that is capable of addressing the imbalance of power between Israel and the Palestinians. 40. Part 5. Issues of biopower. The of the separation wall on the West Bank labor market. Sami Miari and Dordi Milosav. At the time the decision was made by the Israeli cabinet to erect the separation wall one between Israel and the West Bank in 2002, the territory of the West Bank has been under a systematic closure regime for more than a decade. The closure regime was introduced in 1991 in the occupied Palestinian territories, OPT, which implied systematic restriction of movement of goods, labor, and people. 2. It restricted the movement between the OPT and Israel, between the West Bank and Gaza, and international crossings between the West Bank and Jordan and the Gaza Strip and Egypt. Lastly, the closure also included the restriction of movement within the OPTs through an elaborate system of checkpoints. 3. Th's closure only applies to Palestinians living in the OPT. Israeli settlers and foreigners in the West Bank can move freely. In the summer of 2003, Israel began the construction of a wall separating major Israeli and Palestinian population centers. The wall was originally devised by the Israeli government as a security policy in response to the violent events of the Second Intifada, 2005. The separation wall is a mix of 8-meter-tall concrete walls, mostly built in the urban areas, and pyramid-shaped barbed wire fences surrounded by patrol roads. Overall, the wall runs parallel to the Green Line, a line created as an outcome of the armistice after the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, which later became a separating line between Israel and the territories it captured in the Six-Day War of 1967. Yet, for most of its route, the wall is built on the West Bank side, therefore creating the seam zone, an area between the Green Line and the wall which is now controlled by the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, and accessible only to Palestinians with special permits. Furthermore, the wall encompasses a number of the new, post-1967, Israeli settlements, 5 in the West Bank which now lie on the Israeli side, 6 due to the increase of the number of Israeli civilians in the settlements located in the West Bank. Israel has been accused to be in violation of the Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which states that the occupying power shall not deport or transfer parts of its own civilian population into the territory it occupies. 7. As the wall is being built inside the territory of the West Bank, the International Court of Justice issued an advisory opinion in 2004 stating that the construction of the wall is contrary to the international law, ICJ 2004. With the estimated costs of $2 million per kilometer. 8. The wall is one of the largest projects to have been carried out by Israel in the past few decades. By May 2011, Israel had completed 473 kilometers, 61%, of the wall. 54 kilometers, 7%, was under construction, while 247 kilometers, 32%, were still in the planning revision stage. See Figure 12.1 for map of the wall construction by 2008. Upon completion, the wall will end up isolating 733 square kilometers, 733,000 dunams, of the West Bank territory, effectively cutting out 13% of its total area, average 2011. Indeed, The economic implications of the wall for the Palestinian population living in the West Bank are broad. The most notable implication is the Palestinian laborers being sealed off from entry into Israel. Prior to the Second Intifada, Israel employed a quarter of the Palestinian labor force. 9. So the erection of the wall signals a possible effective end of Palestinian participation in the Israeli labor force. Furthermore, the wall separates Palestinian villages from their lands, often situated in the seam zone, thus impeding agricultural workers from working their lands as they have for generations, impairing their livelihoods and in turn reducing their standard of living. 10. The effects of the wall are considerable in many other realms. Palestinians living in the West Bank have an increasingly restricted or no access to schools, universities and specialized medical care, thus resulting in a severe reduction in knowledge, social capital, and the overall health of the population. 11. By our estimates, see below, up until 2010, 224 out of 369, or almost 61% of all localities in the West Bank have been directly affected by the separation wall. Following the existing descriptive evidence, the aim of this chapter is to investigate the effects of the separation wall on labor market outcomes among the Palestinian population in the West Bank. In order to estimate the effects of the wall on labor market outcomes, we employ a differences strategy. TH's identification strategy is based on a comparison of the changes that have occurred between the period before the construction of the wall and the period that succeeded it, and between localities near the wall and those at a distance from it. Thus, we compare localities that are directly affected by the separation wall to localities that are further from the separation wall and therefore not directly affected. We run our analyses using panel data from the Palestinian Labor Force Survey, PLFS, collected by the Palestinian Bureau of Statistics. The information on the separation wall construction is taken from Applied Research Institute, Jerusalem, ARIJ, while the information on control variables such as closures over time comes from ARIJ and United Nations OCE for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCA. We further utilize an array of other CON-ICT-related controls such as the number of Palestinian fatalities and settlement population taken from various data sources. Overall, our results would suggest the wall caused a significant decrease in Palestinian hourly wages as well as a reduction on the number of days worked during the month. Palestinians living in the localities affected by the wall on average worked 5% days less for a 10% lower hourly wage in the month following the wall construction. Taking into account both reduced wages and the loss of working days, an average Palestinian worker living in the close proximity to the wall loses roughly $186 NIS or $56 US per month due to the wall construction. Moreover, the results suggest that the wall has a gendered EECT as females living in the close proximity to the wall on average worked a staggering 54% fewer days after the wall was constructed and men worked almost 21% fewer days. Lastly, the wall construction has a negative EECT on the probability of employment for workers owning a permit to work in Israel and workers employed in the agriculture, construction, and transport sectors. Interestingly, the probability of employment rose for Palestinians working in the manufacturing sector and services, most possibly as a result of the increase in the labor supply caused by the wall construction. 272. The remainder of this chapter is structured as follows. An extensive overview of the wall construction and background information for our study, a literature review, a description of the data, our estimation strategy, the results, conclusion, background, The wall's route and phases. The construction of the separation wall started during the Second Intifada, 2005, in the summer of 2003. The separation wall was just one measure imposed by Israel out of security concerns and aimed to suppress the violence. The wall was built in the north and northwestern regions of the West Bank RST, encircling Jenin, Tulkarm, Kalkalia and Nablus districts, as well as eastern Jerusalem. The route of the wall was laid out in 4 phases. Phase A of construction was completed by the end of July 2003 and consists of approximately 140 kilometers from Salem to Elkanah. Phase B, an 80 km long stretch from Salem to Bet Shean, was completed in 2004, while Phase C included the section of the wall around eastern Jerusalem. The initial Jerusalem defense plan was approved in March of 2003, but due to legal complaints made both by the Israelis and the Palestinians, the decision was made in 2005 to build a temporary barrier around Jerusalem until legal matters were settled. As of 2017, the wall section around eastern Jerusalem, also known as the Jerusalem envelope, cuts out eastern Jerusalem from the rest of the West Bank by following municipal boundaries drawn up by Israel after the Six-Day War in 1967. 13 Phase D consists of a 150 km long section from Elkanah to Ophir and several special sections, such as the one protecting the road from Ben Gurion Airport to Jerusalem, and a number of other areas where the goal seemed to be to incorporate Israeli settlements, such as Gush Etzion and Ariel on the west side of the wall. 14 Therefore, the Israeli government made a number of changes to the wall route during the construction process. This was done in response to petitions by Palestinians and activist groups raising concerns about the illegality of the route. After the Israeli High Court of Justice, HCJ, stated that future expansion plans are not relevant when determining the route of the barrier, the government ordered a rerouting of the wall in at least 4 different instances in 2006, 2007 and twice in 2009. Yet, the ordered relocation usually occurs years after the order, or it does not happen at all. 15 out of more than 150 petitions questioning the wall in general and the route on specific sections of it, most were denied. 16 Furthermore, the route has changed in some areas not in response to these petitions but in order to bring more of West Bank territory or settlement areas into Israel proper. 17. 273. Regardless of these changes, 85% of the built and planned route of the wall runs inside the West Bank, putting 90 settlements such as Ma'ale Adumim and Ariel, as well as 8 Palestinian localities and swathes of unused land appropriate for industrial and residential expansion on the west side of the wall. 18 According to OCA, by September 2017, 460 kilometers, 65%, had been completed, 53 kilometers, 7.5%, were under construction and 200 kilometers were yet to be constructed. 19 Upon completion, the wall will be 708 kilometers long, almost twice the size of the Armistice Green Line between the West Bank and Israel. 20 As a result, according to various estimations, almost 10% to 13% of the West Bank will be on the Israeli side of the wall and practically unreachable to most of the West Bank Palestinian residents. 21 In their 2021 report, B'Tselem found that there were 280 settlements and outposts populated by more than 440,000 Israeli citizens without eastern Jerusalem, and that more than 2 million dunams have been de facto annexed by ochale and unochale means. By Israeli government and international estimates, each kilometer of the wall cost around $2 million US, while the overall costs for the wall construction went from the planned $1 billion to $2.1 billion. 22 Although Israel created as many as 85 gates for purposes such as agricultural work and movement between Israel and the West Bank, in reality most of the gates are either closed, unmanned, or operated for only a few hours a day or only during harvest seasons. Out of the 85 gates in 2016, only 9 were open daily. 23 Moreover, the gates can only be crossed by West Bank Palestinians who have a permit, issued by the Israeli Civil Administration, a branch of the Israeli military which deals with the civil affairs of the West Bank area. C-24 In respect to the legality of the wall construction, based on 2 most important court decisions written by Justice Aharon Barak from June 2004 on the case of Beit-Zoarik and from September 2005 about Alfei Menashe, construction of the wall has been justified on 3 main grounds: that the wall is ochale 1, a temporary measure that will be dismantled when it is deemed no longer necessary; that it is 2, constructed solely based on security-related concerns; and that 3, It follows an internationally recognized legal principle of proportionality as it does not incur disproportionate harm to the local Palestinian population. THSA claims were criticized by many NGOs and the Palestinian Authority as well as by the International Court of Justice. 25. The impact of the separation wall on human rights and quality of life. Adding to an onerous situation caused by the CON-ICT and the existing closure regime, the building of the wall further aggravated the human rights of the Palestinians living in the West Bank, especially in terms of Palestinians' rights of freedom of movement. Urban localities near the path of the wall's construction are commonly subjected to increased movement restrictions within and between Palestinian towns, villages, and hamlets. 26. Moreover, the wall caused an increase in movement restriction between the West Bank and Israel. Palestinians used to travel to Israel for work, education, health services, relative visits, and religious reasons, and the wall made that especially hard. 27. Due to the permit regime and the behavior of the IDF soldiers stationed at checkpoints and wall gates, 28. Crossing the wall became an expensive, time-consuming 274. An overall unpleasant experience. Moreover, as some portions of the wall cut through the inner West Bank, the wall contributes to the fragmentation of Palestinian society. 29. The wall seems to be negatively affecting the sense of Palestinian national identity by separating Palestinians from other Palestinians, and not Palestinians from Israelis. 30 out of 85 wall gates in total, 66 are agricultural gates made to serve farmers accessing their land beyond the wall. Only a few gates are open daily, and only some landowners can access it by acquiring a permit from the Israeli civil administration. Moreover, all gates close every time a complete closure is imposed, which happens after attacks or during Jewish holidays. Farmers who do obtain permits have trouble working their land because they generally are not allowed to bring in farm equipment or laborers to assist them. Procedure for obtaining a permit is cumbersome, and, to aggravate matters, the civil administration has yet to publish the criteria for obtaining a permit in Arabic. 31. As a result, the availability of farming options is limited to cultivation of non-intensive crops such as olive orchards, thus reducing economic output. 32. Furthermore, the number of permits has been slowly decreasing. In 2016, only 58% of agricultural permits were approved, despite such measures being unlawful under international law. 33. The wall and the closure regime have severe negative consequences on West Bank economic development as well. According to World Bank estimates, the West Bank economy suffered mostly due to limited access to land and international trade. World Bank, 2006, 2008a, 2008b, while poverty among Palestinians is rampant. World Bank, 2014. Negative economic consequences of the separation wall are prominently gendered, affecting both men and women but in different ways. According to a 2010 study conducted by the World Bank, the traditional roles of men as breadwinners are threatened by unemployment caused by the state of the West Bank economy and the shrinking Israeli market for Palestinian labor. As over 99% of Israeli working permit holders are men, 34 movement restrictions are disproportionately hitting men. As a result, men opt out for local private businesses or the informal sector, often with little success, or decide to work for the settlements. 35. In response to this financial shock, women sometimes take up work in agriculture and the public sector, thus adding an additional burden to their regular household roles. With unemployed men and overworked women, Palestinian families often experience frustration and animosity. 36. Lastly, the wall construction caused infringement of the right to property through demolition and confiscation of Palestinian property and agricultural land. 37. Palestinian property has also been seized through military orders, declaration of state lands and evictions. 38. A considerable increase in land seizures happened during and after the Second Intifada. Out of 35,000 dunams of land seized in this period, over 25,000 dunams were seized for the wall construction. 39. Literature review. The existing academic interest in the EX of the Israeli closure regime and the separation wall more specifically is growing. Yet, compared to various aspects of the closure regime such as checkpoints and the permit system, the EX of the separation 275 wall are relatively understudied. Furthermore, the existing literature is mainly focused on the political implications of the wall, especially in regard to its implications for peace and international law. 40 Therefore, by examining the EX of the wall on the labor market outcomes, we aim to contribute to the wider literature on the consequences of the Israeli closure regime. For the purposes of this chapter, we primarily present the results for the existing labor market research on the separation wall and closure regime EX and briefly touch upon the existing evidence on their political implications as well. Economic consequences of the closure regime and the separation wall. Miari and Sauer, 2011, show that closures caused an increase in worker supply from abroad, which in turn negatively affected Palestinian monthly earnings. Mansur, 2010, corroborates their endings by showing that closures increased the supply of both skilled and unskilled workers in the West Bank, which in turn reduced the wages, but only for unskilled workers. Itkes, 2011, on the other hand, shows a positive EECT of Israeli employment permits on wages and employment, but only for unskilled workers. Kali and Miari, 2018, showed that checkpoints negatively affected West Bank Palestinians' level of employment, wages, and days worked, mostly through a reduction of labor demand caused by the restrictions on the mobility of goods across locations. Roy, 2001, and Farsik, 2002, show that many people moved across the Green Line for work and commerce before the buildup of the wall. Indeed, according to the data from B'Tselem, 1999, in 1992 more than one-third of Palestinian workers were employed in Israel and 42% of GDP was composed of the income of those workers. 41 Ths is an important ending, as cross-border movement prior to the construction of the wall is a key aspect of the West Bank labor market and, as will be shown, is an important element for our estimation strategy. When it comes to the wall EX, Sanders, 2010, NDS that the building of the wall cut the labor supply and induced low-skilled worker shortage in Israel, which in turn resulted in an increase in non-Jewish foreign workers. Focusing on the West Bank side of the wall, Kali and Miari, 2018, ND a positive EECT of the wall on employment, suggesting that the wall might be creating short-term work opportunities. Similarly, Oberholzer, 2016, NDS negative EX of the wall on unemployment rates, but only for men. Yet, the economic participation of women declined significantly and more noticeably than for men. Furthermore, Oberholzer, 2016, 4, found that the agricultural sector suffered considerably and argued that it was undoubtedly a result of higher transaction costs, the reduced access of some communities to their agricultural land and/or workplace, and the destruction and confiscation of agricultural assets. Braverman, 2009, and DiCintio, 2013, confirm these endings. Indeed, to the best of our knowledge, Oberholzer's study is one of the most detailed analyses of labor market EX of the separation wall. Yet, as the author notes herself, the study fails to control for variables such as the number of Palestinian fatalities, the availability of credit and ownership of the Israeli working permits, and variables related to the closure regime, most of which we are able to control for in our study. Moreover, 276. We have individual level data on the local level, as opposed to the governorate level used in Oberholzer's study. Lastly, we employ a diff-in-diff estimation strategy, thus accounting for unequal EX of the wall between the period before its construction and the period that succeeded it, and on areas in the West Bank that are close, treated, and further away, not treated, from it. The existing research on political implications of the wall taking a historical perspective, Cohen, 2006, argues that the construction of the wall serves two Israeli political goals: 1. the O'Chaley proclaimed and justy ed need of the Israeli government to protect its citizens, and 2, the promotion of a territorial strategy in line with its political ideology. As a result, Cohen concludes, by taking up the West Bank territory east of the Green Line and de facto including it in Israel, the wall is undermining the viability of a Palestinian state, and consequentially the two-state peace solution. El Atrash, 2016, presents a detailed account on how the construction of the wall is impeding the possibility of a two-state solution. The author discusses the implication of the wall on several key issues. By constructing the wall east of the Green Line, Israel is de facto annexing Israeli settlements around East Jerusalem and elsewhere in the West Bank, thus violating internationally recognized border between the Palestinian territory and Israel, as well as perpetuating the Greater Jerusalem Plan 42. Furthermore, the author documents that the wall is severely affecting the West Bank water supply as well as the amount of available land for infrastructural development. Altogether, the author concludes that all facets of Palestinian socio-spatial and physical development have been adversely affected by the construction of the wall, in a way that makes envisioning sustainability and viability of the coming Palestinian statehood a dim possibility. 43. The more formal empirical analyses of political implications of the closure regime and wall construction is scarce. Longo, Conetti, and N. Heidt-Rubin, 2014, exploit an easement of checkpoint policies as a natural experiment, and ND that less restrictive movement policies cause a decrease in the support of violence among the Palestinian population in the West Bank. Furthermore, by relying on original panel data they were able to tease out the mechanism behind such an EECT and argued that the easement of checkpoints reduced the perceived humiliation among the Palestinians, thus reducing their readiness to support violence. Thus, by including various set of indicators measuring the levels of political violence, we aim to control for con-ICT on labor market outcomes. Data. In order to examine the EX of wall construction on labor market outcomes, ideally, we would use georeferenced individual level panel data on the labor market outcomes with a time span including the period before and after the construction of the wall. Secondly, we would require time series data on the construction of the wall. 277. In addition, in order to account for competing factors that might influence labor market outcomes, we would require data on other aspects of the closure regime such as checkpoints, entry permits, and the presence and location of the Israeli settlements. Lastly, in order to account for the EX of con-ICT we would require georeferenced data on the type and intensity of the con-ICT. Luckily, all of the above-mentioned data requirements are met. In this section, we describe the data and present our estimation strategy in the next section. Labor market outcomes. For the information on the labor market outcomes, we rely on the data from the Palestinian Labor Force Survey, PLFS, collected by the Palestinian Bureau of Statistics. We utilize the statistics on daily wages, employment status, number of days worked in the previous month, number of hours worked in the previous week, as well as the information on the type of occupation and the industry one is employed in. PLFS data are available from 1995 to 2010 at the individual level. One household is surveyed 4 times over the period of 6 quarters, in the RST2 and the last 2 quarters. Furthermore, the PLFS data include information on the type of community, city/village/refugee camp, where the subjects of the study reside. Most importantly, the survey includes the exact location coordinates of each household as well as the location of the workplace of each household member if employed. This information is crucial in order to identify the EX of the separation wall. We exclude individuals from the Gaza Strip as we are interested in the wall EX on the West Bank labor market and restrict the sample to individuals of legal working age, 15 years and above. Descriptive statistics on key socio-demographic variables are presented in Table 12.1. Separation wall. Information on the separation wall construction is taken from Applied Research Institute, Jerusalem, Araj. TH's data is available for every other year from 2002 to 2016. To obtain data on the length of the wall for the missing years, we use linear interpolation. TH's data contains information on a. the length of the wall for each West Bank locality that crosses the path of the wall, b. the location of the locality relative to the wall, e.g. behind the wall, outside the wall, circled by the wall, and divided by the wall, and c. the distance of the locality from the wall. Physical barriers. THE information on closures over time comes from Arij and Oka, 44, which has been monitoring the barriers within the West Bank since 1995. As noted, the closure regime is a complex system of movement restrictions imposed by the IDF, which includes a multitude of physical barriers of various types. The Israeli army has been constructing permanent and partial checkpoints, road blocks, earth mounds, road gates, all of which restrict the movement within the West Bank. Regardless of the type, the barriers are prolonging the travel time between localities within the West Bank, are imposing greater costs of traveling, and are often reported as places of humiliation by the IDF towards Palestinians. 45. For each type of barrier, we have information on the position of the barriers for each locality in every year according to the road distance in kilometers. We construct a weighted count of the number of barriers within 20 kilometers via existing roads, from the locality's centroid, weighted by the inverse of the distance. TH's weight captures the idea that the more distant a checkpoint is, the less it will AECT mobility to and from a certain locality. Con-ICT. Palestinian fatalities. TH's dataset contains information on all Palestinian fatalities due to politically motivated violence in each year since the outbreak of the RST Intifada in 1987 for each locality. TH's data is collected by the B'Tselem, the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the Occupied Territories, and is considered to be accurate and reliable by both Israelis and Palestinians. 46. Settlement data. TH's dataset is provided by the Applied Research Institute of Jerusalem, Arij, and contains information on the location of Israeli settlements in the West Bank. TH's data allows us to calculate the road distance between the settlement and various Palestinian localities. Using this information, we follow Kali and Miari, 2018, to construct an index of the total population of the Israeli settlements within a 20 km road distance from the locality's centroid, weighted by the inverse of their distance. THE 279. Weighting ensures that settlements further away the locality have less of an EECT on the index. Estimation strategy. Our main estimation strategy is based on the differences in differences design, where we utilize the timing of the wall's construction adjacent to each locale as our treatment variable. The empirical model we use to measure the EECT of construction of the West Bank wall on Palestinian labor market outcomes is where YILD is the labor market outcome of individual I in locality L and quarter T. YILD is either a dummy indicating employment, natural logarithm of hourly earnings, natural logarithm of the number of days worked in the previous month, or the natural logarithm of the number of hours worked in the previous week. Barrier TL is a dummy variable equal to 1 if the observation is taken from the post-barrier construction in locality L, which is located near the barrier, or 0 otherwise. Using the Arij data on the separation wall construction, we calculate the distance between the locality's centroid from the wall and assign a value of 1 if the distance is less than 5 kilometers. Locality IL is equal to 1 if the individual I is from locality J, located near the barrier, i.e., treated by the barrier, and 0 otherwise, localities not in proximity to the barrier. Xidle is a vector of individual characteristics that include years of schooling, age, and age squared, experience, as well as dummies indicating personal status, residence in an urban area/refugee camp, gender, and industry type. Epsilon ILD are the error terms. Parameter alpha 3. Measures the difference in differences EECT of the West Bank wall on the labor market outcomes of a locality situated near the barrier. It measures the causal EECT of the West Bank barrier on labor market outcomes. We discuss the overall EX of the wall as well as examine the heterogeneity of the wall's EX by gender, industry, skills, and having a working permit. In order to control for the EX of the internal closure regime and violence, we include our closure regime index and measures on the number of Palestinian fatalities in the preceding quarter. Lastly, we add the settler population index. As noted, physical proximity between Israeli settlements and Palestinian localities may AECT Palestinian political attitudes and the intensity of CON-ICT, which can in turn AECT labor market outcomes. 47 Furthermore, as many Palestinians ND work in the settlements 48, as well as due to the notions that the trajectory of the wall seems to be built in order to ease the access of the settlement population to Israel. As the location of settlements might AECT both the location of wall construction and labor market outcomes, we include our settlement population index as an additional control in our baseline estimation. More formally, we expand on our baseline estimation in the following way. Results. Main results. THE results of the main analysis are presented in Table 12.2. All models include individual and time XEDEX and robust standard errors using the Huber-White method clustered at the locality level. Note that due to our coding approach where we coded the distance of the locality from the wall by referring to the distance obtained in 2016, the distance variable was omitted from the regression output as it is XED for each individual throughout the panel rounds. In models 1, 3, 5, and 7 we present the results of our benchmark estimation with employment, logged hourly wage, logged days worked in the previous month and logged hours worked in the previous week, respectively, where we only include individual level controls. In models 2, 4, 6, and 8 we include additional locality-level CON-ICT related controls, closure index, settlement population index and the number of Palestinian fatalities in the preceding year, to further test the EECT of the wall construction on each of our labor market outcomes. Across all models, the expected mean change caused by the wall construction between the treated and untreated individuals is negative. Yet, it is statistically significant only for hourly wage, P0.01. THE quotients and the significance of the EX of the wall construction on hourly wage and days worked in the previous month does not change in a meaningful way and remains statistically significant after the introduction of CON-ICT related controls in models 4 and 6. Lastly, the EECT of the wall on employment in both models is negative and significant at 10% while the p-value for number of hours worked in the previous week is greater than 0.10. When it comes to the EECT size, following the output of Model 4 from Table 12.2 with all controls, the difference in wages between the treated and untreated localities after the wall has been constructed is around 10%, 10.1%. THs indicates that the construction of the wall, on average, caused a 10% decrease in hourly wages for the Palestinians living in the localities closer to the wall. As the mean of the hourly wage for Palestinians across the West Bank is around 11 NIS according to the data provided by PLFS, the wall caused an additional loss of 1 NIS per hour, or roughly 176 NIS per month, according to a West Bank average of 22 working days. Following the current exchange rates of 2022, the wall caused a loss of roughly $53 to each Palestinian worker every month. Yet, this loss is likely to be much higher as the number of days worked was also reduced. As it is shown in models 5 and 6 of Table 12.1, the difference in the number of days worked in the previous month between Palestinians living in treated and untreated localities after the wall has been constructed is around 5%, 5.56%, indicating that Palestinians living in the localities closer to the wall on average worked 5% days less in the month following the wall construction. As the average number of days worked during the month for the whole of West Bank is around 22 days, PLFS, a 5% decrease would indicate that the wall is costing each affected Palestinian on average just over 1 day worth of work per month. Taking into account the reduced wages and the loss of working days, an average Palestinian worker loses roughly 186 NIS or $56 per month due to the wall construction. In the next section we present the heterogeneity of EX of the wall construction by taking into consideration individual's gender, skill level, permit ownership, and the type of industry that the individual is working in. Heterogeneity of EX. In tables 3, 4, 5, and 6 we present the results of a set of heterogeneity EECT estimations on employment, hourly wage, logged numbers of days worked in the previous month and the logged number of hours worked in the previous week, respectively. Yet, for brevity, we discuss the results by the type of heterogeneity in question while taking into account all labor market indicators. THE estimations are constructed by running the baseline divariance while subsetting for the variables for gender, skill level, ownership of a permit to work in Israel and the type of industry one works in. In all models we include the full list of controls. THUS, this provides estimates of the heterogeneity of wall EX across these categories. All models include individual and time XEDEX and robust standard errors using the Huber-White method clustered at the locality level. Gender. According to this analysis where we subset for gender, table 12.3, both genders experienced a drop in days worked in the previous month and hours worked in the previous week, while women sued substantively more. Moreover, this analysis would suggest that only females sued from a drop in the hours worked, p0.05. In terms of the size of the EX, females on average worked a staggering 54% fewer days after construction of the wall while men worked almost 21% fewer days. Moreover, females on average experienced a 55% drop in the number of hours worked during the week while the EECT of the wall on the number of hours worked was statistically insignificant for males. Lastly, only males experienced a drop in wages of roughly 10%. Therefore, it seems that the wall did not cause a loss of jobs or changes in wages among the females but it did AECT their time spent at work. THSA results are consistent with the idea that the economic and psychological tension in the household caused by male members of their household getting less work and being paid less pushed women to DECT work in order to stay at home and care for the household. Skill. Subsetting for skilled and unskilled workers suggests that although the number of days worked dropped for both skilled and unskilled workers, the EECT is much stronger for the skilled workers, see table 12.4. For the skilled workers, the number of working days dropped by 39% while the unskilled workers experienced a drop of 15%. Furthermore, the number of hours worked dropped only for the unskilled while the corresponding quotient for the skilled workers is statistically insignificant. Permit. The heterogeneous EECT on Palestinian workers who own and do not own a permit for work in Israel is one of the main and most interesting results provided by our analyses. Note that by default, all individuals included in the models on heterogeneous EX of permit ownership work in Israel. THSA workers should be directly affected by the wall construction as the wall serves as an additional obstacle on their way to work. Subsetting for workers with and without a permit suggests that the wall construction has a negative and statistically significant EECT, p0.01, on the probability of employment but only for workers owning a permit to work in Israel. The probability of employment for workers without a permit is unaffected by the wall construction as the quotient is statistically insignificant, but also negative. Is probably caused by the notable reduction and erratic procedure in issuing working permits after the wall construction. As Palestinian workers need to acquire sponsorship for their permit by their employee, the Israeli employers might be more reluctant to sponsor the permits as the wall would further complicate commuting to and from Israel, thus providing an unreliable labor force. Moreover, the Israeli employers might be further incentivized to hire workers without permits as the administrative procedure could be avoided and the undocumented workers provided with comparatively lower wages than for Palestinian workers with permits. TH's understanding is widely supported by the extensive report on working conditions among the Palestinian workers working in Israel conducted by ITUC, 2021. Moreover, This is further supported by our data, as the probability of employment among the workers without a permit was not affected after the wall construction. The number of days and number of hours worked was negatively affected only for the workers with the permit, p 0.01. Is consistent with the understanding that the wall is causing delays when crossing to and from Israel, but only through Ochale wall gates and with clean paperwork. Workers without permits would have been crossing to and from Israel through un-Ochale channels, so the commuting obstacles caused by the wall construction would not have an EECT on their commuting time and overall access to Israeli working places. Is supported by the ITUC report, 2021, which suggests that illegal workers spend more time in Israel, often in hiding, in order to reduce the number of times they are required to cross the border and thus risking in getting caught. In terms of wages, the wall caused an increase in wages among the workers with permits and a decrease in wages among the workers without a permit, with both quotients being statistically significant, p 0.01. Industry type. Subsetting for different industry types provides us with further insight into the heterogeneity of EX, see Table 12.6. For brevity, we report only statistically significant results and focus on employment. Probability of employment after the construction of the wall for Palestinians working in the agriculture, construction, and transport sectors dropped dramatically, with the agriculture sector being hit the strongest. On the other hand, the probability of employment rose for Palestinian. Time: 290. Working in the manufacturing sector and services, although the EECT in terms of the EECT size is not as strong. THSA results are consistent with the idea that the wall is cutting access to the Palestinian land on the other side of the wall, thus limiting employment opportunities in the agriculture. Furthermore, as the majority of Palestinian workers in Israel work in the construction sector, a drop in the probability of employment in this sector is expected as well. Finally, as the West Bank is highly reliant on Israel for trade, 49, the wall is causing a drop in employment for the transport sector, as the wall is very likely further complicating the transport of goods between the West Bank and Israel. It is possible that the limited increases of the probability of employment in the manufacturing and the service sector mirror the Palestinian efforts to end alternative jobs in response to the loss of their previous employment in the sectors of agriculture, construction, and transport. Conclusion. In this chapter we examine the effects of the West Bank wall construction on labor market outcomes of Palestinians living in the West Bank. In spite of the extensive research on the effects of the closure regime, 50 the consequences of the construction of the West Bank separation wall received comparatively less academic attention. 51 by employing a difference estimation strategy on any grained individual level panel data and taking into account an extensive set of both individual level and locality level controls, we provide RST causal evidence of the wall effects on labor market outcomes. Overall, the wall caused a significant decrease in Palestinian hourly wages as well as a reduction on the number of days worked during the month. Palestinians living in the localities closer to the wall on average worked 5% days less for a 10% lower hourly wage in the month following the wall construction. As the average number of days worked during the month for the whole of West Bank is around 22 days, PLFS, a 5% decrease would indicate that the wall is costing each affected Palestinian on average just over 1 day worth of work per month. Taking into account both reduced wages and the loss of working days, an average Palestinian worker loses roughly 186 NIS or $56 per month due to construction of the wall. We further examined the potential complexity of wall EX by testing whether the construction had a differential EECT across gender, skill, permit ownership, and industry type. According to our analyses, the wall has a gendered EECT as females on average worked a staggering 54% fewer days after the wall has been constructed, while men worked almost 21% fewer days. Moreover, females on average experienced a 55% drop in the number of hours worked during the week, while the EECT of the wall on the number of hours worked was statistically insignificant for males. Secondly, both skilled and unskilled workers were affected negatively by the wall, with the EECT being much stronger for skilled workers. Our analysis would suggest that the number of working days for the skilled workers dropped by 39% while the unskilled workers experienced a drop of 15%. Thirdly, focusing on the workers employed in Israel, we provide evidence that the wall construction has a negative EECT on the probability of employment only for workers owning a permit to work in Israel. Is, coupled with other results on the 291. Heterogeneity of wall EX on Palestinians with and without permit ownership would suggest that the wall is causing delays when crossing to and from Israel, but only through Ochale wall gates and with clean paperwork. Workers without permits would have been crossing to and from Israel through un-Ochale channels, so the commuting obstacles caused by construction of the wall would not have an EECT on their commuting time and overall access to Israeli working places. Finally, our analysis of the heterogeneous EX of the wall on Palestinians working in direct industries would suggest that employment in the agriculture, construction, and transport sectors were hit the strongest, while the probability of employment rose for Palestinian working in the manufacturing sector and services. It is possible that the limited increases in probability of employment in the manufacturing and the service sector mirror the Palestinians' efforts to end alternative jobs in response to the loss of their previous employment in the sectors of agriculture, construction, and transport. Is consistent with qualitative evidence provided by various NGOs and international organizations which so far have mainly focused on agriculture. The mechanism behind a drop in employment in the construction and transport sector and an increase in the manufacturing and service sectors warrant further research. 13. Palestinian Refugee Archives. UNRWA and the problem with sources. Salim Tamari and Eliezer Reich. United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, was established following the War of 1948 as part of General Assembly Resolution 194 as caretaker of Palestinian refugees. It employs over 30,000 employees involved in the fields of health, education, and welfare administration in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, the West Bank and Gaza. UNRWA's partly digitized archives is one of the richest sources of sociological data on any refugee population in the world, covering demographic, economic, household, health and educational attributes. It is also comprehensive and diachronic, covering the shifting features of the Palestinian population over 7 decades since the inception of UNRWA, 1951 to 2022. Family lay described below contain a unique document for each refugee family describing the conditions under which each family became a refugee in the War of 1948, and listing family belongings left in the village or city of origin. Following essay is derived from a 2000 report titled Reinterpreting the Historical Record, Uses of Palestinian Refugee Archives for Social Science Research, Institute of Jerusalem Studies, 2001. It integrates 2 chapters which summarize the author's contributions on the problem with refugee data sources, with particular reference to UNRWA sources. Authors conducted a LD survey of the data sources in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and the Palestinian territories during 1999 to 2001. In addition to the survey of the UNRWA archives which is presented here, the full study includes contributions by Martina Rika on policy analysis, Bassem Sirhan, Lebanon archives, Jaber Suleiman and Mana Rabbani, on Syrian archives, Julie Petit, on American Friends Service Committee, AFSC, archives, Michael Fishback, the United Nations Conciliation Commission for Palestine, UNCP, records. Gers listed in this essay refer to the situation as it existed in 1991 to 2001. Data sources on Palestinian refugees. While UNRWA is the main depository of data on registered Palestinian refugees, it is not the only such source. A sister UN organization, the United Nations Conciliation Commission for Palestine, UNCP, possesses in its archives extensive data on 295-296. Conscat Palestinian refugee property. Archives of the International Red Cross, IRC, Geneva and Bern, and the American Friends Service Committee, AFSC, OCES in Philadelphia contain valuable information about Palestinian refugees that predate UNRWA's establishment in 1950. In an effort to preserve a major segment of Palestinian history for national and research purposes, the Institute for Jerusalem Studies, IJS, undertook an assessment of the feasibility of digitizing available archival data stored in paper form in 2000. THEIJS also contracted a multimedia specialist to prepare a pilot study to estimate the cost and ways to electronically link various aspects of the UNRWA archival system including text and graphics. UNRWA's Archives, a historical note. UNRWA is the successor to the short-lived United Nations Relief for Palestine Refugees, UNRWA, which was established on December 11, 1948 by a United Nations General Assembly Resolution 194-3, and existed from January 1949 to May 1950. The purpose of the UNRWA and its successor UNRWA is to alleviate the hardships faced by the close to 750,000 Palestinians who became refugees in 1948 and their descendants. For more than half a century the refugees, now into their fourth generation, have been prevented by Israel from returning to their homes. UNRWA, which is the longest-serving refugee organization dedicated to one specific group, has been caring for Palestinian refugees through thick and thin, in a region that has seen major wars, in 1948, 1956, 1967, 1973, and 1982, as well as numerous other internal upheavals, including two major Palestinian uprisings against Israeli occupation in 1987 and 2000. Throughout this entire period, UNRWA strove to maintain a functioning organizational and bureaucratic structure spanning the locations of refugee camps in fields of operations in the West Bank, Gaza, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. Until 1995, UNRWA's administrative headquarters were located in Vienna, after which they were moved to Gaza. Like any other organization of its size, employing in excess of 20,000 people consisting of doctors, teachers, and administrators, UNRWA has become a depository of vital information akin to census data chronicling the genealogy of Palestinian refugee life from the time of their dispersal up to the present. The purpose of this chapter is to describe the scope and nature of information stored on Palestinian refugees, with a view to recommending ways to improve access to and storage of millions of documents, which if not properly transferred to electronic medium soon, are bound to decay and become degraded, thus rendering their future use in doubt. As a start, the two authors prepared in 1996 Phase I of the feasibility report on the conditions of the UNRWA archives in Amman, Gaza, and the West Bank. The report is reproduced in this chapter and details the structure of UNRWA's archives. The archives consist of the original family documents deposited by the refugees with the agency, basic family fact sheets containing interviews carried out by the agency with the refugees in 1948, socio-economic database containing information about families classed as hardship cases, basic information about individual refugees, administrative records of the agency, health and education records which extend back to no more. Palestinian Refugee Archives 297. Then VE years, and the audiovisual holdings which contain still pictures, LMS, slides, videos, posters and maps. 2 years later, in 1998, Phase 2 of the UNRWA ELD work commenced to complement the 1996 UNRWA site visits. 2 researchers, Bassem Sirhan and Suleiman Jaber, were contracted to prepare reports on the UNRWA archives in Beirut and Damascus, which serve as headquarters for UNRWA's ELDs of operation in Lebanon and Syria. THSA3 reports provide the most thorough description of UNRWA's archival structure. International Red Cross and American Friends Service Committee. Prior to the arrival of UNRWA on the scene, and immediately after the 1948 war, the IRC conducted the RST systematic registration and provided emergency services to the refugees in the West Bank, Lebanon, and Syria, while the AFSC did the same for the refugees in Gaza. Both organizations compiled data on Palestinian refugees at the time, all of which was turned over to UNRWA when it was established in 1950. United Nations Conciliation Commission for Palestine (THE-UNCP) was established by the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 194, the same resolution that governs the UNRWA mandate. THE-UNCP was instructed by the UN to facilitate the repatriation of the refugees, their resettlement, rehabilitation, and economic compensation. Implicit in this mandate was the need to carry out evaluation of refugees' property. For over a decade, between 1951 and 1964, the UNCP undertook to document the extent of Palestinian property losses and come up with a value GUR for this property. In the process, the organization produced close to 500,000 documents. Recently, efforts were made to digitize the paper documents as part of the UN efforts at modernizing its records. Two overriding themes concern us in this essay. One is to describe in detail the organizational structure and the practices which evolved over more than half-century to monitor, administer, and provide essential services to a refugee population that numbers in excess of 4 million people and is scattered in different geographical areas. Second is to provide the reader with a sense of how this information, all of which practically exists in archival format, could be preserved as an integral part of Palestinian history, and eventually utilized to carry out policy-related research and academic analysis. THERST organized attempts made at assisting Palestinian refugees immediately after the 1948 Nakba were undertaken by the AFSC and the ICRC. In the closing months of 1948, the AFSC was asked by the United Nations to OER assistance to the 200,000 Palestinian refugees who ended up in Gaza after their expulsion and from their homes and villages. The archives of the AFSC in Philadelphia started in January 1949, when the AFSC established THIRD-WORLDISM in Gaza, to May 1950, when the AFSC handed over its refugee lay to the newly established UNRWA. The organization of the archives is meticulous. AFSC kept detailed records on the administration of Palestinian refugees, and reactions and impressions of the AFSC's relief workers at the 298 time. In addition to the statistical data which was turned over to the UNRWA and is not available in Philadelphia, the archives contain a wealth of qualitative information which captures the operation of the largest refugee NGO at the time in an environment where the local population in Gaza numbering around 80,000 was overwhelmed and ill-equipped to handle a of 200,000 refugees. For researchers, the administrative material is useful in highlighting the process of organizational decision-making under highly stressful conditions. In her report on the AFSC archives, Julie Petit describes the archives as a classic example of object instruction. She remarks that refugee voices are completely absent from these archives, and goes on to say that for those interested in the construction of the refugee as an object of intervention and management, these documents are exceedingly enlightening. Parallel to the AFSC activities, the ICRC-OCES were set up in December 1948 in Amman, Beirut, and various parts of Palestine. On behalf of the UNRWA, the ICRC provided medical and relief assistance to Palestinian refugees until May 1950, when their services were transferred to the UNRWA. When the ICRC terminated its refugee assistance operation in 1950, it shipped only 1/10 of its estimated 10 tons of documents to its Geneva OCES. The rest were destroyed in Beirut. Jalal al-Husseini, investigating the ICRC archives, discovered that none of the personal information about refugees was available in Geneva, even though the ICRC had registered between February and April 1950, 331,000 refugees in Arab Palestine, i.e., outside the Israel armistice border of 1948, and an additional 28,000 internal refugees in what became Israel. In all likelihood, these records were passed on to UNRWA with the transfer of responsibility between the two organizations. As with what the AFSC archives revealed, here too the bulk of the material in Geneva deals with the administrative and organizational functions of the ICRC, and chronicles reports from its THIRD-WORLDISM in various locations in the Middle East. To the extent that these records dealt with individual refugees, they related to the limited number of family reunification cases, where basic information about the applicant was preserved. However, these application forms did not include the full range of demographic and background data on the applicant. In some cases, the ICRC contained information about the circumstances surrounding the expulsion and displacement of refugees. In other cases, the ICRC was singled out by its own functionaries for not having provided sufficient assistance to refugees to curtail their hasty departure from Palestine. The definition of what constitutes a refugee seems to be guided by administrative criteria than by any universal definition. Thus, the ICRC definition of refugees hinged on losing their domicile as a result of the 1948 war. Th's definition did not accommodate those who lost their livelihood but remained in their domicile, such as the residents of Tulkarm and the Bedouins of Beersheba region. In spite of any shortcomings, the ICRC did manage to set up 36 refugee camps and provide preliminary educational, health and relief services until UNRWA took over the task of looking after the refugees of Palestine. Our estimate, after visiting UNRWA headquarters in Amman, Gaza, and the West Bank, is that close to 70 million documents are stored in these sites. The survey of the UNRWA OCES in Syria covered the family hardship cases and educational and health data. It is estimated that there are 5.3 million documents in total. The survey. Palestinian Refugee Archives 299. Count of documents in UNRWA's Lebanon ELDs of operation carried out produced a GOR of 6.3 million sheets of paper. The count for Syria and Lebanon did not include administrative records, since most of these administrative documents are stored in the Amman headquarters. Altogether we can say that there are around 80 million sheets of paper of direct interest to the digitization project, in addition to the audiovisual material. There are important variations in the administrative practices, depending on the site in question. For example, in Syria the government kept close tabs on the refugee population from the outset. The Syrian Ministry of Labor and Welfare maintains close coordination with UNRWA, so much so that the registration number given to Palestinian refugees by the Syrian government appears on the refugee LE maintained by UNRWA, and vice versa. Any changes in the family status of the refugee, birth, marriage, death etc., must also be coordinated between the two agencies. Is in contrast to Lebanon where although the government set up a separate administrative unit in charge of the refugees, the chaotic situation in the country made such close coordination between the UNRWA and the Lebanese government impossible to maintain. Jordan too maintains a separate department dealing with Palestinian refugee affairs which is alliated with the Prime Minister's OCE. Unlike Syria, Lebanon, and other Arab countries, Jordan granted Palestinian refugees of 1948 full citizenship status, and it coordinates with UNRWA routine monitoring of the camps. Even in the West Bank and Gaza where the rest of the refugees are located, the Israeli civil administration carried out in 1967 its census of the occupied territories and maintained the population registry until it was turned over to the Palestinian Authority, PA, in the wake of the Oslo Agreement. Even here, the PA, in accordance with the interim agreement with Israel, continues to provide the Israeli government with all updates to the population registry. At least this was the case until the outbreak of the second uprising following the collapse of the Camp David talks in September 2000. UNRWA registration forms contain historical and current information dating to the pre-1948 period. For example, the pre-1948 information, contained in the family covers things such as birth and marriage certificates, property deeds, land registration, tax receipts etc. The registration coding scheme makes it possible to trace changes in family and individual member status across 4 generations, covering social and geographic mobility of the refugees. It is thus possible to construct a demographic pro-LE of Palestinian refugees for policy and research purposes. Rough proper linkages with other documents in the LESS. One should be able to examine relationships between health factors, education, and other demographic variables, bearing in mind that the educational and health data extends back only VE years. Process of linkages through creating a standardized coding system for the various types of documents in UNRWA's archives is yet to be achieved. Is in spite of UNRWA's valiant attempts to create a uniform registration system. In instances when UNRWA contemplated substituting the current family/household system with an individually based registration system, the host governments reacted with unease, fearing that such a system would imply undertaking a census and as such poses a threat to their national statistical sovereignty. 300. On occasions one comes across data revealing information that has been little known so far. For example, the UNRWA archives in Syria contain information about 2 depopulated villages near the Syrian-Israeli border containing the Bakhtara and Ghanimeh tribes. Although they became refugees in 1948, to be later allowed to return to their villages in 1949 after the signing of truce agreement between Israel and Syria, Israel moved some of them in 1951 to other locations within the Green Line, and in 1956, on the eve of the invasion of Egypt, Israel expelled them to the Syrian Golan Heights, and they eventually moved to other locations within Syria in the wake of the 1967 war. As of this date UNRWA refuses to register them as refugees, after numerous attempts were made by the refugees themselves. Although the UNRWA archives contained information about refugee property ownership, the extent of this information was rather limited. A more comprehensive source is the database compiled by the UNCP and stored in New York. There is no doubt that there is an overlap between the UNRWA and the UNCP data. UNCP did not distinguish between refugee and non-refugee in its survey. It thus included data about Palestinians who became refugees in 1948 but did not register with the UNRWA, as well as information about non-Palestinian owners of property in Palestine, and Palestinians who remained in what became Israel. Michael Fishback states that the UNCP records contain the most complete and most reliable source of data indicating the number of refugee landowners and the scope of their losses available in the world. Shortcoming of these archives is due to the fact that the UNCP did not take into account collectively owned land, wakf land, built-up areas, publicly owned land, and movable property. In short, the UNCP records must be used with care, particularly in calculating Palestinian losses for compensation purposes in any future settlement between the Palestinians and Israelis. In addition, UNCP records have major AWS, pointed out both by Fishback and Abdul Razak. One of these is the absence of all records pertaining to land in the Beersheba region, where communal and nomadic usufruct was preponderant. Land constituted a very substantial area of Arab property in pre-1948 Palestine. Inclusion of these properties will be a major task involved in the updating of these LESS. One main objective of this archival document is to initiate both policy and scholarly studies on how best to use refugee records in a manner that will relate to the current debate about the future of refugees. Most pressing among them is to help in a concrete way to address the issues of claims for restitution and compensation of refugee property, and the issue of repatriation of refugees. We hope that these documents will contribute to create the basis of an integrated corpus of data which cross-references material from UNRWA, UNCP, IRC, and AFSC archives. Another task would be to enhance the internal usability of each of those registries. In the case of UNRWA we are proposing that future input be made in 3 areas. Expansion of the Uni-Ed registration system, URS, to include regular input from the various health and education LOCES so that the demographic prole are more comprehensive. Will allow not only for regional comparisons about the conditions of refugees but will also give us time series comparisons about changes in their conditions. Palestinian Refugee Archives 301. Incorporation of historical material located mainly in the family lay, as well as in other data from the Central Registry of UNRWA Archives, into the computerized system. Also entails transforming the URS from a current database into a historical Database, allowing for the accumulation of biographical data over 4 generations of refugees. With such horizontal and vertical expansion of the UNRWA database, the researcher can begin to examine regional differences among refugee communities, and address in a more systematic manner the tasks of rebuilding refugees' lives once schemes for repatriation are undertaken. Material is suggested in this chapter about the utility of such investigations using existing data. For example, we show how the URS can be effectively utilized for tracing place of origin of refugees before the 1948 war and correlating this geographic information with their current residence, refugee camp status, material condition of the family, and the demographic profile of its members. With the enhanced incorporation of the family lay, and with effective linkages to the UNCPLAY, we can expand these correlations to assess losses during the war, property claims, and existing skills obtained by family members. With the preparation of claimly, such data will prove to be indispensable. But for this type of research and policy programs to be effective, we should also focus on the question of linkages. As they were constituted since 1950, UNRWA family lay are not the proper source for establishing systematic documentation for material and non-material claims by refugee household. THEIR utility is limited in giving a partial picture about the social conditions about the refugee household, their habitat before their exile, and the conditions that led to their expulsion from Palestine. Only by linking these less to the Refugee Property 1, known as RP1, forms, covering the bulk of private property entries, that constitute the basis of the UNC data, does one begin to acquire a holistic picture about the material conditions of the refugee families and the magnitude of their losses. It is hoped that these collected papers will provide a modest but useful basis for the researchers and policy makers seeking sources and methods to establish a linkage between the 4 main data sources on Palestinian refugees. UNRWA Archives on Palestinian Refugees. United Nations General Assembly decision to move the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, headquarters from Vienna to Gaza, and eventually wind down its operations, had serious consequences for the future of Palestinian refugees on 2 levels. First, regarding the existential future and legal status of Palestinian refugees and with it the future of the camps. Second, which is our primary concern here, is the future of the organization and the wealth of information stored in it, estimated to be in the millions of documents. Current information and historical data on more than 3.2 million Palestinian refugees and spanning close to half a century of operation are 302. Stored in various UNRWA archives and ELDs of operation. Is information, the bulk of which is stored on paper, deals with personal, familial, administrative, legal, and organizational matters. If not transferred to another medium and preserved properly, this information is likely to further erode with the passage of time and render the medium on which it is stored inaccessible to further use and preservation. In cooperation with UNRWA, the Institute for Palestine Studies, IPS, prepared a feasibility study proposal which was submitted to possible donors for the purpose of funding. Partial funding of the feasibility proposal necessitated dividing the work into 2 phases. Present report is the outcome of Phase I of the feasibility study. It concentrates on surveying the conditions of the UNRWA archives in 3 of its VELs of operations, Jordan, the West Bank and Gaza. Archives in Lebanon and Syria will be dealt with in Phase 2 of the project. Additionally, the American Friends Service Committee's archives in Philadelphia, which contain data on the initial displacement of Palestinian refugees in Gaza, will be covered in Phase 2. Gaps in the records. It is important to bear in mind that the above information does not cover the entire Palestinian refugee population, let alone the Palestinian people. With regard to the former, the UNRWA family archives do not include information about Palestinian refugees, who qualified for registration under UNRWA's definition of Palestine refugees but were excluded from its mandate because they did not originally settle in any of UNRWA's designated 5 fields of operation. From 1993, UNRWA began to accept applications from these refugees for inclusion in its registry. In addition, Palestinian internal refugees, who were displaced during the 1948 war but remained in what became Israel, have been excluded from UNRWA's registry of refugees, even though the ICR and the AFSC carried out an enumeration of these internal refugees. During its visit, the Feasibility Study Team, FST, discovered that the UNRWA archives contain uncatalogued basic information about this group. THEY will be incorporated in the universe of refugee population. THIRD, well-to-do Palestinians who were displaced during 1948, or those who were outside mandatory Palestine when the 1948 war broke out, do not appear in UNRWA's list of refugees. Finally, Palestinians displaced for the RST time during the 1967 war do not formally fall under UNRWA's jurisdiction, even though the organization assists them in conjunction with the host governments of Jordan and Syria. Amman headquarters and LOCES. THE feasibility study has several objectives. First, it intends to recommend ways to preserve the only systematic information available on close to half of the estimated 7 million Palestinians worldwide. Second, it assesses the feasibility and possibility of eventual transfer of these archives to the Palestinian Authority, PA, where they will be stored in a national Palestinian archive. THIRD, to organize the data in such a way so as to make it available for research and policy making. Fourth, to maintain the operational use of the data as long as UNRWA maintains its functions vis-a-vis the Palestinian Refugee Archives 303. Refugees. Fifth H, to establish levels of access depending on the type of user in question, example administrator, policy maker, researcher, or layperson. In order to achieve these objectives, the feasibility study proposed to use the latest technology in order to preserve UNRWA's millions of documents electronically through the use of hypertext and multimedia technology where text, sound, graphics and pictures will be stored on a CD-ROM. *THs will give the user simultaneous and easy access to a variety of types and levels of information and at various levels of linkages between the data. Moreover, the information will be stored in such a way so as to enable future users to manipulate it for research and policy purposes, and, as long as UNRWA remains in existence, to update its information for operational purposes. THs necessitated the designing of databases with open architecture in order to facilitate their constant updating and classification. An elaborate coding scheme will be developed in the future to facilitate easy use of the stored information. Additionally, and depending on the type of usage, different access methods will be developed to conform to standards of confidentiality. In SPECIC terms, the feasibility study aimed at linking electronically, for the RST time, the main data sources available at UNRWA. THEY consisted of the following. THE Central Registry, which contains records related to various legal and administrative matters pertaining to programs, agreements with governments and international organizations, and information about UNRWA personnel. THE Uni-Ed Registration System, URS, presently operated from the Amman headquarters, which integrates data stored in UNRWA's archives with data gathered regularly from the field OCES. THE Socio-Economic Database, which contains information pro-ling individuals and families who qualify for hardship assistance. THE Demographic Database, which encompasses background information about refugee families and their members. THE Family Files, which are distributed in UNRWA's VE fields, but so far have not been computerized. THE Health Files, located at the various field OCES and clinics in each of the VE fields of UNRWA's operation, and contain detailed information about the health conditions of refugees. THE Educational Files, which are located at the various schools and field OCES in each of UNRWA's VE fields of operation. THE Films, videos, and still pictures, which date back to the early FUD IES, if not earlier, and are currently stored in Gaza and UNRWA's Amman HQs. Compared to the rest of the databases and because of their historic nature, the family files and the central registry contain the most systematic information stored on Palestinian refugees. THEIR information provides the basis for policy and research analysis. For example, data stored in the family files provide in some cases the most detailed information on the demographic background of Palestinians at the individual and family levels. Age, generation, gender, family size, occupation, and marital status, to name a few of the possible codes to be used in classifying the information contained in 304. The family files provide us with rich material on Palestinian refugees spanning across 3 generations. Longitudinal analysis of the data, through comparing educational levels of members of the same family across generations, is a unique opportunity to assess the relationship between demographic background and educational attainment. Similarly, by linking the family files to data available in the Departments of Health and Education, one can obtain a reliable picture of the determinants of the well-being of Palestinian refugees. It is possible to learn from the rich experience of UNRWA and the wealth of the available data to apply this information to Palestinian society as a whole. In addition to demographic data, the family files contain in some cases information about land and property ownership in Palestine prior to the dispersal, certificates of birth, marriage and death, place of origin and destination of the refugee, and the circumstances surrounding their exodus. THE Central Registry files document the workings of the organization by preserving, for example, documents pertaining to the various projects undertaken by the agency since its inception, the legal, financial and administrative aspects of the running of the agency, including information on its more than 20,000 employees, the overwhelming majority of whom are Palestinian refugees themselves. While so far this has not been explored, these archives contain the experience of the agency, its so-called institutional memory, and could very well provide useful information for the nascent Palestinian state in the areas of administration and delivery of health and education services. Whether it is research, policy, or sheer interest, information in these lists will prove to be of immense importance for preserving the collective memory of the Palestinian people and their travails over the last half-century. In November 1995, UNRWA distributed a project proposal aimed at computerizing and developing a uni-ed registration system which at that time was estimated to cost $3.2 million, aiming at integrating 3 of its databases. A database on individual registration containing 3,322,210 registered Palestinian refugees. A database on 676,025 family lay, and a database on 181,437 hardship cases. The advantage of this system, from UNRWA's point of view, is that it furthers the efficient running of the agency and the operation of its various functions, and eventually would link the agency's various social programs such as health, education, and social services. Subsequently, UNRWA prepared a proposal for a pilot study to assess in more concrete ways means of storing on optical disk data derived from its family files. TH's pilot project, budgeted at around $50,000, focused on Jordan only. It was proposed, by using the same indexing method common to several of UNRWA databases, to link these lists to other components of the URS, which include the registration database and the socio-economic database. Finally, while the RST2 proposals were intended to focus on the efficient running and delivery aspects of UNRWA, there was a third proposal whose purpose is mainly Palestinian Refugee Archives 305. Research-oriented with some policy implications. The French Centre d'études et de recherches sur le Moyen-Orient contemporain, CERMOC, proposed to approach UNRWA as a prototype of an international organization with a view to analyzing its administrative culture and mode of interaction with its outside environments, be they refugees or other international actors. By drawing upon political science, sociology, and anthropology, CERMOC proposed to assess the means by which it is possible to transfer the knowledge and expertise gained by UNRWA over the years to Palestinian society at large, including the PNA. TH's objective was achieved through in-depth interviews with representatives of the agency and by carrying out documentary analysis of its archival material. In an effort to tap the organization's institutional memory, Cermak was hoping to capture an important element of Palestinian history. The projects of UNRWA, IPS, and Cermak converge in certain aspects and diverge in others. First, UNRWA is primarily concerned with facilitating the operational side of the organization. THUS, of the various attributes we associate with the UNRWA data, UNRWA is interested in a subset of these. Whether it is the demographic, socio-economic, health or educational background of the individual refugee, UNRWA's focus is on the operation of the organization. As such, it has not attempted to tap the historic dimension of the so far uncatalogued family lay and link them to the various databases. Cermak was primarily interested in the administrative attributes of the organization, i.e., its central registry, and how these re-ECT the culture of the organization and its relationship to the outside environment. THEIPS project aimed at establishing linkages among the various data sources available at UNRWA. THE linkages were to be carried out by means of 1. Identifying and classifying the various documents, 2. Developing a coding scheme which renders the documents amenable to analysis, and 3. Deploying an appropriate software which makes possible the physical transformation of the documents from hard to soft medium through imaging and optical character recognition. Inventory of UNRWA archives. Since its inception, UNRWA has accumulated a vast number of documents, data lay and archival sources that present a challenge to classification. For the purposes of this study, we have chosen to identify these documents under 3 main headings: data lay, archival documents, and visual and mapping documents. The data lay include the UniEd registration system, the family lay, and the hitherto unclassified lay on internal refugees. THEY also include the data lay derived from the education and health departments. THE archival documents are mainly concentrated in the records of the central registry, which cover the active and inactive lay accumulated, previously, in Vienna, now in Amman and Gaza, and the LOCES. THE visual and mapping documents include the photo archives, video and 16mm LMS, and maps prepared by the ELD engineering units. A fourth source of archival data that is not dealt with here, but is of potential significance, is the routine reports that are daily transacted in the LOCES, schools, and UNRWA clinics. 306. Only the aggregate data derived from these reports eventually appear in periodic and annual UNRWA publications. Many of these transactions, such as procurement records, and individual health reports of patient visits, are periodically destroyed. The ability of UNRWA to computerize ELD activities, especially in health and education, may allow future researchers to include even those activities in permanent databases. We will now deal in some detail with the contents of these archival sources. THE UniEd registration system. At the heart of the UNRWA databases is the system of family and individual data entry and retrieval system known as the UniEd registration system, URS. It is a unique informational system which has the most comprehensive social and demographic data on Palestinian refugees, unmatched, in terms of size or attributes, by any similar system anywhere. URS began in 1979 when a registration database system was established in Vienna on an M mainframe. Since that date, the Relief and Social Services Department initiated a process of conversion through which all its registration data acquired from the ELD was integrated into the URS. Advances in the technology and costing of computerization allowed the system to be decentralized so that data could be gathered in regional computers and then transferred periodically to the central system in Amman. THSA ELD registration systems are quite recent: 1993 in Syria, 1994 in Jordan, 1995 in Gaza and the West Bank, and March 1996 in Lebanon. In April, all data was transferred from the Vienna mainframe to the Amman central computer, a Unix/Sybase platform. Only backup lay from the old IBM mainframe remain in Vienna. TH's backup data is significant since it contains historical information not incorporated into the present URS. THEURS has three major components, and a fourth potential database, for internal refugees, which will be discussed below. THE Demographic Database. TH's database contains two kinds of documents: household demographic data on all refugee families who have active registration for UNRWA services, altogether about 670,000 families, known as Family Demographic Files, or FAMDEM, and record of individual members of these households, known as Individual Demographic Files, or INDDEM, covering as of 1995 about 3.3 million Palestinian refugees. TH's data is continuously being updated. THE Socio-Economic Database, SEDB. Based on a much more detailed and comprehensive informational output, this database is derived from the special hardship cases, refugees who fall below a certain income level, require services not available to the bulk of refugee households. Data on SEDB began in 1991 and contain family attributes since that date, but not before. THE SEDB covers three sets of data: demographic data on households that are eligible for assistance under the special hardship cases, FAMSOC, additional. Palestinian Refugee Archives 307. Statistical attributes of such families, FAMSHC, and extensive data on individuals in those categories. THE Socio-Economic Database is linked to the demographic database so that correlations, for administrative and research purposes, can be established. Input for the demographic database comes from the field registration system, including the family lay, ELD investigations, and upgrading of those data by caseworkers. Information for the socio-economic data comes from the Special Hardship Cases questionnaire, and from the Family Fact Sheet. THSA sets of information then feed into three databases. THE FAMSHC, basic data on special hardship cases, the core information for SHCs, number of case, no of rations, SHC category, elderly, widow, disabled etc., and the date of investigation. Socio-economic database, more general family and individual demographic attributes, address, family income, forms of assistance, health status, education, and economic status. Table 13.1 indicates the total number of lay available for the VE major data categories in the UNI-ED registration system. All VE categories of data in the URS are derived from two main sources: THE basic data sheet in the family files, see below, and continuous update provided by the ELD OCES on the basis of ELD investigations on the part of UNRWA case workers, and requests made by individual refugees to obtain services. THS the information contained is based on living and operational transactions. THE Family Lay. THE Family Lay contain the non-computerized basic information from which the demographic data is ultimately derived. It contains the most extensive data on the attributes, composition, and changes in the status of almost 750,000 refugee families. There are some 644,543 family lay in the VE regional OCES of UNRWA containing, for all ELDs except Gaza, a basic family fact sheet recording the original circumstances. Table 13.1 UNI-ED registration system, data files by category, August 1996. Field of UNRWA. Operations. Demographic database, socio-economic database, families individuals, SHC families individuals. West Bank 132,664, 534,413, 8.2 * 7,706, 26,729. Gaza 150,160, 719,269, 13.3 2,491, 56,593. Lebanon 84,596 353,945 9.2 8,778 33,996 Syria 78,535 348,504 6.86 396 20,117 Jordan 230,071,366,087 8.68 209 33,129 Total 676,025 3,322,218 46.2 43,219 170,564 Source UNRWA HQ Amman, August 1996, figures in thousands 308. Of the refugee family and supporting documents of the family's pre-1948 status. The fact sheet contains the names of family members, sex, their date of birth, occupation, if any, current residence, conditions which led to their leaving their original homes in Palestine, education, selective, and the relationship of the family member to the head of household. The supporting documents are varied. Mostly contain birth certificates, marriage certificates, reference to property deeds, references to occupation in pre-1948 Palestine, and so on. Because family law were originally opened with the objective of providing relief services, the criteria of eligibility for material support were established by UNRWA Eldsta in 1950. UNRWA family law constitute a continuity with the system of registration that was initiated by the IRC, in the West Bank, Syria, and Lebanon, and the AFSC, in Gaza, in the aftermath of the 1948 war. Contrary to common perception, however, the data contained in the current, 1950, law was not transferred from the IRC/AFSC law but contained data that was re-entered by UNRWA between 1950 and 1952. In this process many initial applications for registration were dropped since they no longer met the newly established for UNRWA registration. Others were also dropped because they left the VE regions, or ELDs, of UNRWA operations. THSA became known as dead-less for administrative purposes. Theoretically, however, refugee families whose law were dropped from the active register were retained in inactive law, which were no longer eligible for the agency's services. Table 13.2 indicates the number of family law and their proportional distribution by region. In 1992, UNRWA's former Commissioner General, Iliter Turkmen, reopened the process of registration for Palestinian refugees without any condition of need as a prerequisite. The new objective was simply to document claims to refugee status for those Palestinians who were formerly denied registration as a result of the need standards. The new law, amounting to about 400 law annually for all VE regions, altogether less than 1,500, are better documented than the earlier law in terms of pre-1948 family property. The contain extensive supporting evidence of title deeds, professional status, rent and tax records, school records, etc. The older law on the other hand have better documentation on the current, at the time of registration, status of the refugee family, since the purpose of registration was to establish eligibility for services. On average, the older law tend to re-ECT the social status of Palestine's poorer and destitute refugees, while the Turkmen law tend to re-ECT the conditions of the professional and middle classes among refugees. Table 13.2 Family files and their regional distribution by field, 1996. Region number of files percentage. Jordan 230,070 34.1. Gaza 150,160 22.2. The West Bank 132,664 19.6. Lebanon 84,596 12.5. Syria 78,535 11.6. Total 676,025 100.0. Source, derived from UNRWA data on URS, Amman August 21, 1996. Palestinian Refugee Archives 309. In terms of classification, the prospective researcher should think of these lists as falling into three categories. Active family lay, the vast majority, the lists which constitute the raw data for UNRWA's URS and other demographic data. Inactive, dead, family lay, the less withdrawn either because their respondents no longer fulfill eligibility criteria, or because they moved out of UNRWA's ELD of operations. Data from these lists do not appear in the URS, except by mistake. Reactivated family lay, the ongoing entries by refugee families who were so far denied registration as refugees because of the need eligibility criteria, i.e., poverty, or because they were so far outside UNRWA area of operations. Data from these lists are not entered into the URS. It is quite possible that there is some overlap between the inactive lay and the reactivated lay. The key link between the family lay and the demographic database is the initial registration code, known as the X code, and the current registration number, which supplanted the X code in 1956 to accommodate the need for standardization of recording the expanded number of refugees. When a member of a refugee household separate from his or her original family, and start a new household, a new LE is opened which is connected 1D the original household by the X code. Thus, every single refugee has an individualized registration number, a family registration number and a family X code, the latter two items being common to all household members. The possibilities inherent in this coding system for establishing linkages over time, as well as within the demographic attributes among household members, are enormous. Family files and their supporting documents are currently outside the computerization system of the URS. THEY are classified and handled manually in the VE fields of operation. The condition of historical documents attached to the LES are fair to poor, but will deteriorate with time. The main problem for establishing a feasibility for processing these documents, for example, scanning them, as a prelude to classification, is their volume. The current UNRWA estimate of these documents is 25 million, based on an average count of 40 papers per document. Since new entries are being made, particularly by reactivated family lay, and since the new lay are likely to be larger in size, this estimate would have to be upgraded. A count of 100 papers, as an upper limit, would yield an estimate of 67 million papers. Historical note: the evolution of refugee registration since the UNRWA system of registration is becoming increasingly standardized, particularly digitization of data and the establishment of the URS, it would help the researcher to delineate here the manner in which the system evolved. According to Lex Tackenberg, who has done a systematic examination of the registration system, the system is typified by a large degree of adaptation to problems of administering refugee aid in each region. In Gaza, for example, UNRWA registration records, which are based 310 on AFSC earlier records for 1948 to 1950, are most accurate and complete. In Lebanon, due to local conditions, they are the less so. Tackenberg suggests that because the earlier UNRWA records from Lebanon included several thousand Lebanese migrant workers who lost their livelihood as a result of the 1948 war, UNRWA introduced the well-known criteria of continued residency in Palestine, 1946-48, as a precondition for refugee status, in order to eliminate these workers from the roll. Here we have delineated a schematic chronology of the registration phases. 1948-50, THE Initial Registry. THE International Committees of the Red Cross, ICRC, and the American Friends Service Committee, establish a registry of all refugees in Gaza, AFSC, and the other Arab host countries, also performed by the ICRC. We have been unable to find traces of this registry in the archives. Serial coding is used using a combination of alphabets, for region, and serial number, for family code. 1950, MasterCard's UNRWA takes over the registration based on eligibility, means test, from AFSC and ICRC. Contrary to common perception, UNRWA registers refugees. Registration was based on a standardized pink forms, gray for Gaza, known as the master cards. THSA cards still exist in the Gaza registry, but not in the West Bank or Jordan. THEY may have been destroyed. THE ration registration card was established as a 6-digit identification number for each family, replacing the AFSC/ICRC numbers. Each region was given a range of potential registration number which allowed future growth of the refugee families to be added. A fact sheet was included in the family LE of each refugee family, except in Gaza, which summarized the results of ELD investigation of the status of that family. 1956, IBM punch cards. In 1956 the 6-digit ration number was replaced by the 8-digit family registration number. THs was entered on IBM 8x32 punch cards for the mechanical enumeration of refugee family attributes. THE old ration card became known as the X code. Each family had one unique registration number, see note on X code in the historical section below. 1958, index cards. THE punch cards were further simply added and entered onto index cards which provided a typed standardized summary of each family's attributes, see the logical structure of UNRWA registration below. Nuclear families that split from the parent families were given new X codes. 1979, Registration Database. THE beginning of computerization of family demographic data for all ELDs on an IBM mainframe computer in Vienna. Palestinian Refugee Archives 311. 1994-96, UNI-ED registration system. A centralized system of data entry from the relief and social services, but not from health or education, was developed. THE system relies on systematic and periodic data entering the central computer from the VELDs and processed in Amman. THEURS utilizes both the X code, the 8-digit family registration number, and a 10-digit registration number for each individual refugee. It contains data on 3.2 million Palestinian refugees. THE logical structure of the enumeration system. Both the unique family registration number, RN, and the code of origin, CO, which appear in each data sheet in the URS, contain a logical structure which is of immense use to the researcher. THE 8-digit registration number, RN, identifies the family alphabetically by the RST name of the head of household and his serial number in his family, the region they live in, and their habitat, big city, small city, village, camp, out of camp. THUS, the number 2510153 refers to a family from Gaza district, 2, living in Deir al-Bala, 5, in an out-of-camp location, 10, followed by the alpha group name of this particular beneficiary, Arabi Abdullah Doli. THE X code, which appears next to the RN, links the computerized demographic data of the RN sheet with the non-computerized family LE, which includes the accumulated documentation of all family members, marriage certificates, birth certificates, changes in family economic status, educational career, etc., and with the computerized socio-economic data if the family falls into the special hardship cases. In the latter case, an SHC number appears next to the RN. If there is a blank next to the SHC number, it indicates that this family is not classified as an SHC case, and therefore no socio-economic computerized data is available for it. THE replacement of X codes by the new registration number was necessary for technical and administrative reasons. Technical because the 6 digits did not accommodate the amount of information required, and administrative because UNRWA wanted to streamline its records. Until 1993 a new X code was given to newly established nuclear families, upon the production of a new marriage contract. Since this created a lot of confusion in the coding system among members of the same extended family, it was decided to restore the old X code to the new families, beginning in 1993. But this was done unevenly in different areas. THE process is called amalgamation of X codes. In Syria the process is about 85% complete, meaning that the same X code now refers to the same extended family in the majority of cases. In Lebanon, the completed lay are 70% of the total. In Gaza, the West Bank and Jordan, the process of amalgamation is still proceeding. THEVE digit code of origin, CO, which appears next to each registration number, indicates the origin of the refugee family in pre-1948 Palestine. THIS is a valuable historical piece of information that exists for all 3.2 million refugees. In the example cited above, the CO code is 30,007. THIS indicates that the Doli family comes from Jeddah city, 30, from the old quarter of the city, 007. Jeddah and Jerusalem are the only two cities for which details of original habitat are provided. We asked the URS to 312. Provide us with a breakdown for Jeddah refugees. Table 13.3 is an example of what the URS system can provide. A few observations are in order here. The number of families in the last column indicates the current number of families in all regions whose ancestors lived in Jeddah on the eve of the 1948 war. Jeddah general refers to families who did not indicate living in a specific location in the city and may include villagers who gave Jeddah city as their location of origin. THR is a bias in this table, as in all URS data, in favor of poorer refugees. THUS, the Ajami quarter, which was an exclusive, wealthy quarter, is probably underrepresented in this table, while Manshiyeh and Saknet Darwish, both working-class quarters, are probably overrepresented. Some problems in the UNRWA registration system from the point of view of research and policy analysis. The main weakness of the registration system derives from the fact that it was established for the purpose of administering aid to needy refugees, and not for purposes of enumeration. THIS is no fault of its designers obviously, but in preparing the data for research functions one must bear in mind these limitations. THSA limitations can be highlighted by the following features. Heterogeneity in the system of ELD entry. Despite attempts at centralization and standardization of data entry systems, each UNRWA ELD region of operation has its own specificities. Part of this variation is due to historical conditions. For example, in Gaza, the transfer of AFSC registry to family lay did not go through the procedure of investigation fact sheets, which are standard in the West Bank and Jordan and possibly in Syria and Lebanon, where the Red Cross preceded UNRWA as a refugee caretaker. The civil war in Lebanon, and the transfer of family lay from the Sheikh Jarrah, Jerusalem, HQ to Jordan for tens of thousands of families, also disrupted the Cody-Katayan systems in these regions. Palestinian Refugee Archives 313. Multiplicity of X codes. In 1993 it was decided to restore the old X codes to nuclear family members who split from their parent families. Since this process is uneven, it meant that in some ELDs, Syria and Lebanon, the X code records have a different meaning than in other ELDs. THIS problem will be solved when all X codes are amalgamated, but this is likely to take time. THE registration system is not a census of refugees. THE system is based on voluntary reporting by prospective refugees. Confirmation of registration itself, except for new registration since 1993, is based on criteria of eligibility for aid. As a result, a large number of refugees are excluded from the system. Refugees with independent income or property. Refugees who did not reside in UNRWA areas of operation. Refugees who were dropped from the record due to budgetary limitations which set an upper ceiling for refugees receiving aid. Refugees who were the offspring of a refugee mother and a non-refugee father, and therefore not eligible for registration. Refugees whose dignity prevented them from registering. Refugees whose status improved and who moved out of the eligibility criteria. Refugees who lost their home and property but who remained in Israel and became Israeli citizens, about 30,000 internal refugees in 1948. First-time displaced persons in the War of L967, e.g. uprooted residents of the West Bank who sought refuge in Jordan. Only second-time refugees continued to be registered in their new areas. On the other hand, there were a number, admittedly small, of Lebanese, Gazan and Jerusalem citizens who, because their lives were affected drastically by war and occupation, were allowed to register as refugees eligible for UNRWA aid. In short, the registration system is biased towards poorer refugees and is con-net to those living in countries neighboring Palestine. THEURS is linear, in the sense that it freezes the pro-LE of the refugee family at one point in time. Changes over time have to be gleaned from previous, mostly non-standardized, documents in the family lay. THIS makes it difficult, but not impossible, to study patterns of mobility and social change among refugees. While the master cards, of 1950, contain names of refugees in English and Arabic, modern computerized updating of lay is exclusively in English, which leads to considerable confusion in tracing some family names and could lead to double entries. THE Health and Education Department data. So far, the UNI-ED registration system, URS, has excluded data emanating from these two departments from their data entry system. Both departments yield crucial services to refugees that constitute significant complementation to a proper pro-LE of refugee 314. Families. Furthermore, services to students, in UNRWA schools, and patients, in UNRWA clinics, are provided systematically to camp and non-camp refugees seeking such services. In Lebanon, Syria, and Gaza this amounts to over 90% of registered refugees. In Jordan and the West Bank, where alternative services are available in the public and private sectors, the number drops to about 60 to 75%. All educational and health services provide operational data on refugee beneficiaries which can be linked to the URS through the individual registration system. Such linkages are not made currently because, for administrative reasons, these ELDs are autonomous. Also, the technical feasibility of processing the data from the ELD school and clinic to the ELD OCE and then to the central computer at HQ has to be worked out both conceptually and operationally. But the instruments of this integration already exist. In the health department, for example, all beneficiaries must LL an UNRWA Department of Health family file, green card, which contains the UNRWA registration numbers, the names of family heads and members. It also contains a list of chronic and/or family diseases. Each green card has a clinic card, white, attached to it containing the medical history and records of each adult family member. It has a section on hospitalization of family members, dates and summary of physician's diagnosis, laboratory tests with positive endings. THSA cards are permanent and have been kept over the years. Similar records are kept for male, blue cards, and female, rose cards, children who are 0 to 3 years old, and for students in primary and intermediate schools, including data on immunization and screening for vision, height, weight, hearing, and dental condition. All of this data is recorded on forms which can trace their recipient to his family through the RIC number and eventually to the X code. UNRWA maintains one of the most systematic recordings of the health status of its beneficiaries in the Middle East, possibly in the Third World. It would thus be a substantial enrichment for the UNI-ED registration system to have this information base incorporated into it. It would be a great loss if such integration is not done. Internal refugees, a forgotten batch of records. One of the endings of this study was the uncovering of 6 boxes of data cards which contain the initial registration data of Palestinian refugees who remained in Israel. THSA victims of the 1948 war are those refugees, then estimated to be around 30,000 individuals, who remained in the area occupied by the State of Israel during the war, and in its aftermath, but who lost their homes and livelihood due to forceful migration or inability to go back to their towns and villages. Ultimately, most of these refugees became Israeli citizens but, with rare exceptions as in the case of Kfar Baram and Ikrit villages in Galilee, were not allowed to reclaim their homes or land. For many years they were denied citizenship and became known as absent-present, present in the state, absent from their homes. The recovery of these boxes is likely to shed important historic light on the origin and status of this forgotten community. The boxes found contain yellow, original, and pink, correction, link cards containing typed and handwritten data on each refugee family. Each card contains names, ages, sex, occupation, past address, and present. Palestinian Refugee Archives 315. Distribution center to which the family is attached. THE cards also contain indexing slots which can be detached for easy visual recognition and computing of the occupational status of the refugee, farmer, skilled worker, unskilled worker, and whether the refugee had property in Palestine. However, these latter two categories, occupation and property, are not systematically recorded for all cases. THE refugees whose names are registered are mostly from Galilee but contain many refugees from Jerusalem, Lydda, and Judea. THE majority are Muslim and Christian Arabs, but the list contains hundreds of Jewish, Armenian, Greek, and Italian families. Unfortunately, no dates are provided for the entry card, but the corrections indicate that these entries were made between 1948 and 1951. We conducted a rough estimate of the number of cards